I grew up in a very safe area for most of my young life. It was one of those neighborhoods where all the kids knew each other and often stayed out well after dark in the summers to play flashlight tag or search. Our biggest concern was calling our parents to let them know we would be sleeping over at our friend's house. I mention all of this to understand how terrifying my mother's story was to a relatively sheltered 16-year-old me. My mother was and remained one of the most muscular women I have ever known. She survived decades of mental, emotional, and I suspect in her early years physical abuse from my sociopathic father. When he tried to prevent her from getting away by refusing to help cover college expenses, she moved out and paid every cent independently. When a drunk redneck attempted to assault a friend of hers in a way that's not so good for YouTube, she gave him a hard right hook and dropped that pile of human garbage. And if people ever threatened her kid's safety, God help them. That woman would make Mama Grizzlies look friendly. So as you might imagine, I never thought anything could scare this woman. But now I understand that even the bravest person can fear for their survival when monsters come out of the shadows. This takes place around 1985 in my home state of South Carolina. My parents had only been married for about 2 years, both very excited and determined to make something of themselves. They didn't have much money back then and rented a tiny apartment until they could save enough to buy a house. My mom hated that apartment. Precisely the large window in their bedroom that people from the street could easily see into. They wanted to put up curtains, but there were no rods and the landlord was a cheapskate who threatened to keep their deposit if they even put a dent in the wall. It annoyed them that they couldn't even have privacy in their own home, but they decided to ignore it since it was a short-term lease. This would be a very big mistake. Never ignore your gut. This open window would cause Mom to have nightmares for years after. And now, let me tell you about how a murderer first targeted my mom as a potential victim. My mom was an avid runner and a competitive cross-country athlete through high school and college. So, she often went for 3 or 4 mile-long runs in the evenings to clear her mind after work. She was running in a rural area, with few houses and a little traffic on the road. It was an area that high schools like to use in the fall for track and cross-country training. She was out in early summer, so there were no students or other runners around. She liked the quiet and kind of mentally drifted off for a bit. As an old brown-colored car with tinted windows came up behind her, she moved off the road to let them pass. The car seemed to be going past her. The windows were even with her, and then it slowed down. The vehicle stayed this way for about 10 minutes or so, never speeding or slowing, only staying a few feet behind her. My mom realized this person had bad intentions and knew her life was potentially in danger. Worse, there was no one around who could help. She had to make a quick decision, so she sprinted off into the field next to her, thankfully finding a small ditch lined with several thick bushes. She crawled into the largest one and laid flat on her stomach to hide. The car had tried to follow, but the curb had hindered the back wheels. The person attempting to gun it, but the car would not go forward. They were able to reverse it and get back on the road. They drove up the road several times, most likely trying to see if they could spot my mom. After 5 or 6 passes, they gave up and drove off. Mom was so scared she barely remembered to breathe, shaking and crying, waiting for this malicious person to get out of the car. Thankfully, they never did. After waiting 30 minutes and no sign of the car, she returned to her apartment as quickly as she could. My dad was home at the time and shocked to see her state. She told him what had happened and wondered if they should call the cops. My dad promised her he would take care of it and told her to take a long warm shower so she could relax. After all, this was home and he would never let anyone hurt her. Mom took that shower and started feeling better when she looked out their bedroom window. I think you can guess what she saw parked just outside. It was the same car. Utterly terrified, she screamed and my dad came running. She pointed at the car and he lost it. He bolted out of the apartment and ran towards the car, shouting that he would kill them if they even thought about touching his wife. Just to let you know, my dad was about 5'10" and thin as a rail, friendly and always ready to give a helping hand. He was not an intimidating figure to most people, but that day, my dad showed that animal side of him. He showed this creep that he would do whatever it took to protect his family. The car immediately backed up, tires squealing as the man booked it. My parents later called the cops and told them everything. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could really do but ask questions, basically, since there was no actual physical attack. All they could do was make a note and advise my mom not to run for quite some time. The way they said it made it seem as if she was the problem. They grudgingly accepted this and moved to a new place shortly after. No deposit was worth their lives. A few months passed and reports of multiple young women going missing followed by 2 murders brought closure to this story. My mom recognized the car the murderer was driving. It was the same one that had stalked her. What made her blood run cold was the picture of his victims. All young, blonde, blue-eyed women who could have been her sisters. Over the years I've googled the victims and it's shocking how they looked just like her, down to how they styled their hair. According to the FBI profiler who went on to write the book that inspired Mindhunter, this man was one of the most vicious and sadistic killers he had ever dealt with. Maybe the most evil one in his career. After reading about how he would torture the families and make those poor girls write a last will before murdering them, I'm inclined to agree. For anyone wondering, you can learn more about this sick guy and his crimes by googling Larry Gene Bell. I want to say the year was 2005 or 2006. I was 7 or 8 years old and at a family cookout in a haunted ghost town called Pinckneyville, South Carolina. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell am I at a cookout in a ghost town? Well, a family friend owns the land that surrounds it, and still does to this day. I'm not sure what the event was for, but we were always barbecuing and riding ATVs through rural upstate South Carolina trails back then. It was just what we did. Now, I had always heard stories about this place from my mother and father, but I always brushed them off as BS or campfire tales. There are also rumors of the area being inhabited by devil worshippers, but I'm not so sure that's true. I didn't believe this place was haunted until my cousin and I rode our ATVs down one of the many trails. Just me and him, no one else. We were both young. I'm 7 or 8 and he's 8 or 9. It is broad daylight, and as we're riding, we both must take a quick bathroom break, so we stop, get off our rides, and start using the bathroom. I can't speak for my cousin, but I felt weird, like something just didn't feel right. Everything seemed dead. There was no wind, no birds chirping, nothing at all. So after we relieved ourselves, we turned around and noticed a dilapidated building. Wondering why we didn't see it before, we stopped. I don't know. I really don't know how to explain the feeling I had upon looking on this thing. Regardless, we were curious, but we knew enough history of the area to not go about in an old building. So we just looked around and quickly noticed old tombstones that could easily be mistaken for big rocks as they were ancient and weathered. We had just taken a pee in an old haunted graveyard by accident. We looked at each other almost at the exact same time and said, "Oh crap." We quickly jumped onto the ATVs and desperately tried to start the engines, but to no avail. I turned to the key and pushed the start button and nothing, as almost if the battery was dead. My cousin's ATV was also dead. For about a minute or two, we're just trying to get our ATVs to start. And luckily, just when we thought we were screwed, at the same time our engines fired up and we proceeded to get out of there as fast as possible. I can't explain it. That sense of impending doom, like something was preying upon you, but we couldn't see or hear anything at all, was just absolutely menacing. When we returned to where the rest of our family was, we didn't mention it to anyone. I was happy to be with my dad and have a sense of safety. We didn't ride our ATVs for the rest of the day, and I haven't been to Pinckneyville ever since. I was driving around my old friend's neighborhood, keeping an eye on the place, as it was quite the hot spot for unnatural occurrences. One such instance, when he and I were walking down his street, the sun was setting, and the evening breeze glided through the trees. All the while, a peaceful, heavy, and suffocating surrealist filled the atmosphere. Just as a shiver went up my spine, he turned to the edge of the woods, and I followed suit soon after. As if on cue, a man's yell, painful and full of agony, broke the eerie serenity of the evening. Now we are both on edge and hasten our pace and walk hurriedly. His home was just 10 minutes from where we were, but we knew that anything could happen between here and there if we weren't careful. About 5 minutes away from his house, another yell boomed from the woods. only this time it was altered from before, becoming more and more animalistic as it dragged on. We increased our pace again, nearly running at this point. The daylight almost completely gone, and after an hour, we finally reached his front porch. That's when we heard it. Behind us we heard a screech in the woodline, an awful combination of a rooster's crow, a goat's bleat, and a dog's bark. After that, whatever it was, hissed and began coming towards us at a very quick pace. The leaves in the trees rustled as it got nearer and nearer, jumping down from the branches and into the brush of the bushes and smaller foliage. We heard it land on the ground, and soon after, it came crashing towards us, stopping just before it broke out of the wood's cover. Whatever it was, began breathing heavily and pointed its bony, clawed finger out at us, curling it in a motion as if it was tempting us to come towards it. Not long after, my friend unlocked his door and swung it open, both of us stumbling inside and slamming its door shut behind us. As we did, whatever that thing was hit against it and tried to break it down, if not at the very least frighten us. It then sounded like it jumped from the porch and back into a tree, dashing back into the woods. Later that night we heard occasional scratching and tapping noises on the windows and doors and other parts of the house, but we didn't bother to open the blinds or investigate. Thankfully, we had the pleasure of not seeing what the rest of it looked like, but we did have the misfortune of hearing its screams. That's just one of the many uncomfortable, yet equally exciting experiences we've had together. If you want to investigate the area, visit Holbrook, South Carolina. It's in Dorchester County, a quaint and quiet little neighborhood. Unfortunately, most of it has been deforested for housing development, but that doesn't precisely restrain any odd things from occurring. Just be on guard and stay safe. These occurrences take place in my new home in South Carolina. For some backstory, it was the year 2006 when I moved into my current home. I used to be an avid outdoorsman. I used to, anyway. Yesterday, while out on one of my daily hikes during the evening, I found an old, rotting note. After reading this note, I highly doubt I'll be back to those woods for a long while. The note read, "I was out with a few friends for a get-together for a friend of mine. He was going to leave for college in a week, so everyone wanted him to go out with a bang. We were having this get-together in some private property that one of my friends, my few friends were Brandon, Kyle, Alfred, and myself, we used this property to drive around the ATVs and dirt bikes we owned. We drank for a while quite carelessly. Eventually, one of us had the idiotic idea to ride our ATVs around to make the effects of being heavily intoxicated even more extreme. I sluggishly went along. Someone had to be able to watch and make sure nothing happened to them, but it had to be me. I had drunk the second least to Brandon. I was basically completely sober. As we drove further, a sound that I could not describe to this day began to become more prevalent as we went further into the woods. The sound became so overpowering at one point that it covered up the loud noise of our bikes. Eventually, we were all on the ground screaming and covering our ears in pain and torment. No matter which direction we ran, even out of the woods, the sound would still grow louder. At this point, the sound became clear to me that it was most likely a scream. Then I saw something that I will never forget. I saw these, what I can only describe as animals. They looked like pale, light gray humanoid type creatures. They had to have stood at least 4 feet at the shoulder. Their heads had borne the charges of dogs, but the teeth were tiny, blood-red knives. The screaming noise had ceased to stop. Then, there was one creature that stood out from the other 8. This one stood about 6 feet tall at the shoulder. He had a much more muscular build than the others who looked malnourished. His mouth was wide open, still bearing those sharp, long needle-like teeth. But the biggest one, which I supposed was the leader, made a different noise. I could only describe this noise as a clicking noise. It may be necessary to mention that I have the most powerful build of all 4 of us. After my friend had been dragged away so inhumanly fast, I couldn't run that fast if my life depended on it, but at this point it did. But while my friends and I were being dragged away, I realized something. The screaming had stopped. After about 2 or 3 miles, there was a pit of bones from different animals, but the most common were human bones. The stench was so nerve-wracking that I eventually passed out. When I woke up, my friends were already dead. After seeing the bodies of my friends being eaten by the creatures, I will never be the same. The screaming stopped when the animals had something in their mouths. The screaming almost drove me insane. I resorted to feeding the creatures. All my family, friends, and pets, all the people I know are gone. My family, friends, and even my pets are gone. I think the police are beginning to understand what is going on now. They have been showing up at my house more and more lately. The screaming won't stop. I have nothing to feed them except for myself. This is my suicide letter before I jump into the place where I keep the creatures away from all society. Anyone who finds this note, please drop the note now and run. I don't want anyone else to suffer my fate. Now, for whatever reason, I believe that this note is truly genuine more and more by day. A strange screaming noise has been coming closer to my home every night that I keep hearing. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to live here. Every night they just get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. With my trusty revolver at my side tonight, I will most likely not be able to sleep. The sounds that I hear at night freak me out so bad that I can't sleep, and I have to somehow find some sort of prescription drug to make it work. I could hear a scratching noise at my door recently. I'm hoping that things are gonna improve before I get out of here, or hopefully at least hold off until I move. I plan to move back in with my parents in a few days' time. Wish me luck, because I sure as hell am gonna need it. Like I said, when I first found that note, I thought it was just some sort of short scary story, maybe something that somebody had put there to scare people. But after I'm starting to experience these things myself, this story is starting to seem a little bit more real. I wish I had more information on this story. It was a very brief encounter that has always stayed with me since I was young. It may not be the most eventful, but it creeped me out. It started when I was young. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family lived in an old house with a few dogs in South Carolina. It was far from uneventful there. I heard strange noises and saw strange lights outside our house. I was convinced the place was haunted. As it turns out, I may not have been wrong. One of the weirdest things that ever happened to me happened outside of that house. I used to go outside a lot back then. I loved being outside, and the feeling of being out there, regardless of how warm or cold it was freeing to me. But I usually came back in before it got too dark out. I didn't stay out in the middle of the night, but one day I decided to stay out just for a bit longer into the evening. It was getting around 6:30 when I finally decided to go back inside that day. But before I did, I was interrupted by something extraordinary. Above my house was this sort of hill past a road that went through a forest. Up there was a neighborhood, plenty of people living there, at least for some nowhere southern town. Up there was a strange figure. I'd say it was tall, maybe 6 feet tall, but it was hard to tell from where I was standing, and the memories had been understandably vague since I was very young. I just sat there, staggered in disbelief. A tall, pitch-black humanoid figure loomed over me just over the hill. It was blank, and just black, sort of like a shadow. It looked distorted though, like the shadow was moving around like static TV, if that makes any sense. Me being young and confused, I was stunned. It was so bizarre. I didn't know what to do, but the door was right behind me so I could run back into my parents at any moment. I felt safe for that reason. I waved at the creatures as it stood there, and it gave me some sort of wave back for a few seconds. I was so creeped out that chills went down my spine, my heart was pounding, and goosebumps rose on my arms. It looked human and was now acting human. It started making other motions, and the thing, honestly, kind of had a mind of its own, but also was copying my every movement. I started making other motions, and the thing just copied them every time. I even walked closer and poked behind a tree, and it pretended to do the same, even though there was no tree for it to hide behind. I was thoroughly amused. I realized I would probably seem like a madman making weird motions to anybody who saw me. I looked around to see if anybody was looking. When I looked back at the creature, it was no longer there. The way it just stood there at first and then copied my every motion later was so strange and downright creepy the more I think about it. It seems like it was straight out of a horror story or something. The start of some climactic series of events. But I never saw anything like it again. I'm sure there has to be some sort of plausible explanation somewhere out there. But until then, this is the only paranormal story that I have. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I had a disturbing encounter with a creature or entity. I lived in the Appalachian mountain range of Pennsylvania. It was November when around daylight savings time occurred. I remember it was supposed to be a school day, but since the heavy snow came down, the buses could not drive out in the morning, so school was canceled for a snow day. I was excited to spend the rest of the day in the snow, playing and exploring. We had an acre of property going quite far back into the woods. I walked deep into the forest to a small frozen pond past my property line. Suddenly, the woods went dead silent. No sounds of birds, no wildlife scurrying around, absolutely nothing. I remember thinking it was strange but kept walking to make it to the pond. I should have turned around right then and there and just went home, but I was just a naive little kid. After I reached the pond, everything was still completely silent and the hairs on the back of my neck felt like they were rising. I started to get frightened, but I didn't know why. I felt like something terrible would happen to me if I didn't leave right then and there. So I decided, out of some random spark in my brain, to run back home. As I arrived at my backyard, I realized it was so late, and the sun was setting. My mom came running outside asking where I was all day, and never disappeared like that again. Now, none of this made any sense to me, because I had only been out for about 20 minutes or so. I left my house in my snow gear at around 10 a.m., right after the snow day call. It was almost 8 p.m., meaning I had been gone for 10 hours. I have had no idea how this happened and how I had been gone for that long. I only remember being out there for maybe a 15 to 20 minute period. I don't know if this has anything to do with any kind of cryptids or any kind of weird supernatural elements. But I do know it was very similar to the things I've heard on the Swamp Dweller YouTube channel in the past when it came to missing 411 videos. Has anyone else ever had this happen to them? Was it some sort of creature? I didn't see anything at all while out there. I didn't lose track of time, and I didn't fall and hit my head or anything. What do you think happened? Please let me know in the comments, and thank you Swamp Dweller for sharing this experience. I know it might not be super terrifying, but the details surrounding this experience will forever have me scratching my head. So my trucking route is from here in Connecticut down to Kentucky and Tennessee. It's a pretty good run. I get to see all the sights of the East Coast, but one area of the country gets wild. The area around the Appalachian Mountains. You guys probably know that one of the country's poorest areas got screwed over as the coal mining jobs dwindled and the local economy went down the crapper. I feel for those people down there. Seeing how entrenched in poverty some families are is truly heartbreaking. So I was rolling through an area of the state that I hadn't previously been through, thanks to my usual section of the highway being blocked off by some traffic accident that had unfortunately left a few people dead. I was having some trouble navigating the roads after my phone ran out of battery, and wouldn't you know it, the plug charger decided to give out too. Worst timing ever. But I was an experienced truck driver and wasn't driving an 18-wheeler on that run, so I was free to take some more of the minor roads to find my way around. But even though I considered myself pretty good on the streets, there was a point when I found myself hopelessly lost, and I started to worry that I wouldn't make my shipping delivery deadline. That would mean disciplinary proceedings, and I could not afford those. So anyway, I happened to see this guy wandering down the side of the road, so I slow my truck down, wind down the window, and ask him for directions. The guy seems friendly enough and is willing to take a few minutes to give me all the information I need to make it back onto the main highway that are headed south. But then I started asking him if there was anywhere nearby that I could get some lunch, as it was getting towards about 1 in the afternoon, and I'd only managed to get myself a meager breakfast. The guy seems to think for a minute, scratching his head, taking an unusually long time to think of an answer to this question that usually would only take a few seconds to answer. It's rare to be anywhere in West Virginia where there isn't a Cracker Barrel within a few miles, so why he didn't just point me in the direction of one of those was beyond me. When I pressed him, he told me he knew of an old family-run place that did the best chicken fried steak in the entire county, maybe even the state. Suddenly all was forgiven. Now I might be a northerner, but I'll be damned if I turn down a good chicken fried steak. All that was taking so long was for him to try and remember the best way there that wouldn't take me down some run-down old dirt road, one which might get my truck stuck on it, which would have left me screwed. So after a minute, he gave me a detailed direction toward an old strip mall. He told me it was mostly abandoned, but the restaurant was still there, along with a few other smaller businesses, and not to pay any mind that the place seemed quiet during lunch, as it did most of its business in the early morning to late evening. I was happy enough, thanked the guy, then set off following the directions he had given me. So it took me a little while to find the old strip mall the guy was talking about. It was a little frustrating to drive past a couple of chain restaurants and whatnot, given that I was so hungry. But goddamn, if I wasn't craving some of that country style, chicken fried steak, and if it was really a family-run place, then all the better. The chain restaurant stuff doesn't cut it compared to the authentic, home-style cooking. But eventually, I found this run-down old strip mall the guy seemed to be talking about, and it was a wonder that this place was in such a state of disrepair. It was way off any highway. There were absolutely no signs, anywhere. Literally nothing to let you know it was there. But even worse, I saw no indication that any kind of restaurant was open in any of the units. I wasn't about to give up so easily, though, as I saw one place with a big old sign saying something like, Mama J's Country Kitchen, or some weird variation. So my hopes were restored. That's when I see a guy open the door of the place, stepping out into the afternoon heat and staring over at my truck. I gave him away from the driver's side, overjoyed that I was finally about to get some decent food on what had been a lonely drive down from Connecticut. I figured he hadn't seen me do it, that or the sun was obscuring his vision or something, because he just continued to stare back at me. I get out of my truck, lock the doors, and walk to the restaurant. I called out to the guy halfway across the parking lot asking if they were open for business. Again, the guy doesn't react. He keeps staring at me in a distinctly unwelcoming way that I notice. Something in my gut just told me to stop walking. I had this creeping feeling all over my body, like something was telling me that something was wrong with this whole setup. And no sooner had I started feeling distinctly vulnerable, the guy reached behind his back, pulling something out of his back pocket, and put it on his head. At first I thought it was a woolly hat, but then he pulled it down, and I realized it was a balaclava. Then I noticed something else in his hand, a small revolver. I turn and start running back to the truck, and as I do, I see a few other guys emerging from the derelict units, each running towards my car and trying to cut me off. Each had a weapon in their hand, be it a knife or an iron bar, and seeing those just made me run even faster. Thank God I had gotten that feeling when I did, otherwise they would have made it to the truck before I did. I threw the door open, jumped inside, and locked the cab behind me, trembling as I was rummaging for my pocket, trying to get my keys. The bandits surrounded the cab of my truck, hitting the chassis with their weapons and demanding I get out. The guy with the gun aimed it right at my face through the windshield, screaming for me to get the hell out of the truck. I had no choice but to do what I did. I gunned the engine and plowed the whole bunch of them, knocking down those who didn't jump out of the way of mine. I leaned down in my seat as I gripped the wheel out of pure instinct, and again, I thank God I did, because when I did that, and I hit the guy with the gun, he let loose a single shot that shattered the windshield and struck the seat just above my head. I circled the parking lot expecting the following image to come at any moment, but only the bandits that had gotten out of my way of my initial truck charge were chasing me. 2 or 3 were lying on the concrete, rolling around in pain while the others held on to their limbs. I think it's about the only thing that saved me, having the presence of mind to ram them instead of trying to reverse out of there.
If that had been my choice, I might not be around to tell you this story. I got out of that parking lot, speeding off blindly in the first direction I could until I found somewhere to park up and call the cops safely. The sheriff's deputy I spoke to told me to swing on by the department when I was able to, so I could give a statement, and I did exactly that. But not until I'd managed to get some lunch, as not even the terror of almost getting hijacked and getting killed would dull my appetite. I guess that makes me sound goddamn fat, but you guys need to appreciate just how hungry I was. Down at the department, however, I learned that I was not the first truck driver to have this issue. I was not the first one at all, actually, to run into these bandits. How I'd been just unlucky enough to ask directions from one of their kinfolk, who had directed me to a rundown strip mall just before calling his buddies to let them know I'd be there. At least, that's the only conclusion we came to once I described the guy I had asked directions from. The deputy seemed to nod knowingly when I related this guy's physical description. I'm warning you guys to be very careful when you're out on the roads. And although it seems like a tired old cautionary tale from your Facebook posting aunt, be careful when you talk to strangers. There's no way of knowing who they actually are. I've never had paranormal experiences, but I cannot explain this. I'm in college currently, and 7 other people from my school and I went backpacking. We had 2 experienced leaders at the time. We drove to Zaleski State Park in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April this year, and it was cold and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles into the forest, we set up camp at a backpacking campsite, and there were a couple of other groups of people there. As a few were friendly older couples, and then 2 college-age girls, everyone was pretty spread out. We set up camp further away from everyone else. I have always been able to sense the energy of places, and at this point this place didn't feel very great. It was almost spooky. Each of us had individual 1-person tents, and we formed a cluster on this site, with my tent in the back so no one would be behind me. Our group was next to the forest because this backpacking site was like a big cleared off square in the middle of the trees. Fast forward, I'm dead asleep and it's sometime around 2 a.m. I wake up to leaves crunching behind my tent. I hear footsteps walking in circles around my tent. They had a sort of heaviness to them that couldn't be a deer or a dog. Also, it sounded like it was on 2 legs and not 4. I cannot make this up. This creature, or whatever it was circling my tent for long periods, slowly creeping up to the sides of my tent and then just stopping. And then it would move on to walking around the rest of our tent cluster. I could hear a human-like breathing from the mouth when it was close to my tent, like a light sort of heaving. I was shaking, too scared to unzip my tent and investigate. I kid you not, this seemingly went on for hours. And in my experience, it seemed like I was the only one who was awake. Out of nowhere, I see an illuminated light shape from my tent, although I couldn't tell you what it was from inside my tent because it was all zipped up. It was like a warm glow, and it didn't move like a flashlight. I was paralyzed in absolute fear. I couldn't believe this was an animal. At some point, I fell asleep due to sheer exhaustion, but I could hear the heavy footsteps circling until I did. In the morning, I questioned my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted she heard the footsteps and noises as well. Realizing it was bizarre, and she would have investigated had she not been so dizzy, one of the boys in the group said they also noticed the light that came on but thought it was someone else. Not a single person in this group went to go to the bathroom at night or turned on any sort of light. I've heard about the Appalachian regions being creepy and bizarre, and now I truly believe it. Some people online have leaned towards Bigfoot because apparently he is associated with light orbs. I've never seen a Bigfoot, and I've never really been a Bigfoot believer, but I'm telling you, this didn't feel like it was just any animal like a bear. First and foremost, I'm a non-believer. I've never had any encounters with anything supernatural or otherwise not normal. I want to keep this short. Last night I woke up to my dogs barking. As usual, I let them outside to do their thing. For context, I live in North Carolina in the Appalachian mountain range. When I open my bedroom door, I step out into the hallway and immediately slip onto the floor. One of my dogs has been crapping themselves everywhere, running around the house barking and raising hell. I get up and get to the door to let them out, and turn back toward the closet to get some cleaning supplies. I clean it up, and everything is sorted, and put it back into the closet. I then let my dogs back into the house. At this point, nothing too strange has happened, so I open the door to let the dogs in, and two come in immediately. Charlie, the dog who had had the accident, stays out near the perimeter of the electric fence, barking into the dark. I close the door and go into the bathroom to clean myself up. I take off my clothes, shower, and then took the clothes that were old and dirty and set them right outside by the back door. When I do this, my third dog comes back inside quickly. Still at this point, nothing is wrong or out of order. I take a towel to a few spots around the house to get all the fecal matter. I decide to throw out the towel along with my pajamas, so I take the towel and clothes and head toward the bins at the back door. I grab the stuff I'm throwing out in a small basket and head towards the trash bin. Yes, this is where it gets weird. As I walk, I notice it's pitch black outside, and no light from inside is shining out since I had been asleep. As soon as I consider how dark it is, I hear whistling. As soon as I hear the whistle, I hear Charlie inside the house barking and losing his mind. I stop to think what it is. A bird maybe? But it's not. The whistle goes up and down in pitch with fluidity and stops at certain angles. There is no rhyme or pattern to it. I stopped walking as soon as I heard the whistle. As I said before, I don't believe in monsters or demons or anything like that. I do think there are undoubtedly sick human beings, though. I listen for another 5 seconds, maybe before dropping the basket and briskly walking back inside, locking the door for good measure. That night I slept with my shotgun in my bed and all of my dogs close. I still to this day have no idea what made those whistling noises and what was causing my dogs to freak out, as on any normal night they would never act this way and feel like they run this whole area. If anybody has any ideas in the comments down below, please let me know. As far as I know, there's something or someone strange in the Appalachian woods. First, I will say I'm not a believer or a skeptic. I don't know how to describe myself, honestly. I try to find scientific explanations for things while considering that it could very well just be something crazy. This time, I can't call it anything but nuts. I'm an avid hiker and hunter. No, this is not a skinwalker story. I like to go into the woods for days at a time and camp, hunt, and fish. I do this quite often in the Appalachian area. I went into a forest, off the beaten path in the Daniel Boone National Park, as per my usual MO, and searched for a nice place near a creek with plenty of room to set up camp. I had my survival gear, rifle, and camping supplies. My buddy was with me, but he wasn't around when I ran into whatever this thing is. About 3 days in, we were sick of fish, so I went to grab some squirrels, seeing as how they were plentiful and the only thing in season. I'm not going to BS you. Squirrel hunting with a big-ass gun is not really a thing. All I had that would work was a .22 and a knife. I got about 30 minutes from camp, so I was well out of sight and earshot from my friend. I get to a nice, wooded area and stop on a stump. The first sign something was up is that there were no sounds around me. No squirrels, no birds, nothing. The second sign was the sky darkening. A big storm blew in out of nowhere, very quickly. If you live in Kentucky, you know the one. The big lightning storm from a week or two back. This was my cue to F off. I started the trek to camp. I was making good time when I saw whatever it was. It was crawling low to the ground about 100 yards ahead of me. My first thought was a bear, but then it stood up, not on all fours or 2 legs. It had 6 limbs, 2 arms, and 4 legs. Then it hauled ass until it was out of view. Pretty freaky considering it was in the middle of the day during a storm. There's a distinct chance I saw things off and I was maybe just hallucinating, but I'm not so sure. I told my friend about it and he got uneasy and suggested we leave. He's a bona fide Appalachian man, So, bet your ass as soon as the storm cleared, we cleaned up camp and left out of there as quickly as we could. I don't know what this was. Maybe some sort of Bigfoot, maybe some sort of hybrid creature. I couldn't even begin to tell you. But there's something in the Appalachians that's unnatural. I enjoy all the stories you share on the show, and I appreciate the effort you guys put into sharing them. Bringing your experiences to light is very helpful for other people, so I thought I might as well write into the show and share mine. Though it seems a bit silly on the surface compared to other stories, but here goes. I live in the Appalachian Mountains region of the United States. Being in these ancient mountains has always inspired a sense of awe, and I don't think I have ever wanted to grow up anywhere else. And being a descendant of the Cherokee people, it has always felt right to be here, you know? My brothers and I always had a lot of land to explore and run on as children. I always tell people that I grew up in the woods. It felt important to share that little background information because what I saw when I was younger might be rooted in local folklore. But anyway, on to the story. When I was younger, I was never afraid to roam the hills, back in the woods, day or night. It was just a part of me. And one evening, my family had a get-together with friends and family. We had a small fire and roasted hot dogs and s'mores. All the campfire goodies, you know? Well, afterward, once the fire was put out, my father asked me to take the remaining wood and sticks, etc., that wasn't used for fuel to the fire and throw them back in the brush at the end of our backyard, away from the back of the field. He didn't want to run them over when he was mowing the lawn. So I picked them all up and headed back toward the end of the field, and by the time I got there, it was twilight. Beautiful red-orange sky, a nice glow all around. I remember this because of just how eerie it seemed. As I threw the sticks into the brush, I turned around and not 50 feet away from me was a deep, royal blue pig. I was shocked and didn't even move. The entire scene was just marvelous and scary at the same time. I didn't move. Having pigs myself, I know this one was larger than any pig I've ever had. This continued for a few minutes, but realistically we stared at each other for a good 5 minutes before he calmly turned and walked majestically into the forest. Now I know what you're saying. How is this scary? Well, if you know anything about wild boars, especially all across the South, they are a very big problem and are incredibly aggressive. The fact that this thing didn't charge me right away or attack me is a miracle in itself. I never saw this thing again after that. But anyway, I just felt like sharing this with you all. I've told some other people throughout the years, but nobody really believes me. They just think that it was a neat story. But it was 100% true, and something I will never forget. The size of this beast was purely unnatural, and the color it was so interesting. I've never seen anything remotely match that color in the natural world.
I've always enjoyed hiking, but I never really expected to lose myself in the woods behind my local park. Now, at the time, it was getting kind of dark, and I started to panic. I tried retracing my steps, but everything looked the same. The trees towered above me, blocking out the moonlight, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves under my feet. Then, as I stumbled through the undergrowth, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks altogether. It was a small, dilapidated cabin. Its roof caved in and its walls were covered in moss. I approached, albeit cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped inside, I was hit by a wave of musty air. The cabin was dark and I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I fumbled in my backpack for a flashlight and turned it on, illuminating the dark room. It was empty, except for a few cobwebs and some old furniture covered in dust. But as I shone the light around the room, I noticed something on the floor. It was a small pile of bones, picked clean and bleached by the elements. My stomach turned, and I felt a bile rising in my throat. What had happened here? And did I find something that I shouldn't have seen? As I turned around to leave, something caught my eye outside the window. I stepped closer and peered out, my heart racing. It was a clearing, and in the center was a circle of stones covered in strange symbols. A small fire was in the process, and I could see shadows moving around it. I instantly felt my legs go weak and I stumbled backward, tripping over something on the floor. I looked down and saw it was a small journal, its pages yellowed and brittle.
I picked it up, and as I started to read, the horror of what had happened here began to unfold. The journal belonged to a man who had lived in the cabin at some point or another. He had been a hermit, shunned by society, and turned to dark magic to seek revenge on those who had wronged him. He had summoned a demon, which I guess had apparently possessed him, driving him to commit unspeakable acts of violence and depravity. As I read on, my hands were shaking. I realized that the shadows I had seen outside were not just shadows. They were the demonic creatures the hermit had summoned, and they were coming for me. I ran outside the cabin, my heart pounding, and stumbled through the woods. I could hear the creatures behind me, their growls and snarls echoing. I could hear the creatures behind me, their growls, their snarls echoing through the trees. I saw the park lights in the distance, and I ran toward them, praying for safety. I burst out of the woods, panting and covered in sweat, and collapsed. I looked back, but there was nothing there. Nothing was chasing me. The creatures were gone now, and the woods were silent once more. But the memory of what I had seen would haunt me for the rest of my life. I knew I had stumbled onto something awful in those woods and narrowly escaped with my life. Even 10+ years later, I'm a full-grown man now, and I still have no explanation for how I felt that pure feeling of dread that came over me. If anybody in the comments has any idea what I could have seen, what I could have experienced, please let me know. What is that smell? By NatureBot420. I've always enjoyed hiking and exploring the outdoors, but today's adventure in the woods is a nightmare that I'll never forget. Now, I had been wandering for hours in the woods like I typically do on the weekends, but I guess I had somehow lost all sense of direction after a while, probably because I was so enthralled in the podcast I was listening to. Yet, every step takes me deeper into the forest. As I trudge on, my anxiety grows with each passing minute. The trees lower above me like dark sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled, reaching out to grab me. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the snap of twig underfoot. Suddenly, a putrid smell assaults my nostrils. It's a sickly sweet odor mixed with something rotten and decaying. My mind begins to race as I try to pinpoint the source of the stench. I'm almost afraid to move, fearful of what I might find. But obviously, I can't stay still forever. I take a tentative step forward, the leaves crunching loudly beneath my feet. The smell grows more potent, more intense. My stomach churns and bile rises in my throat. I feel like I'm about to hurl, but then I see it. A dead animal lies just ahead. Its bloated body swarming with flies. The sight and smell are overpowering, and I must cover my mouth and nose to keep from gagging. I turn away, but there's no escape. The scent lingers, clinging to my clothes, the air, and even my skin. I stumble forward, desperate to distance myself from the rotting corpse, but the smell seems to follow me, like a malignant presence. I can't shake it off. Finally, panic sets in and I run blindly through the forest. The trees blur past me, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I can hear my heart pounding in my ears. Something just feels wrong. I'm not even sure why I'm freaking out. It's just a dead animal after all. But there was just this overwhelming feeling that came over me the moment I saw that body. I just felt like I shouldn't be seeing this. At this point, I am hopelessly lost with no idea how to find my way back. And still, the smell persists. It's everywhere, surrounding me, suffocating me. I feel like I'm drowning in it. As I run, I catch glimpses of other dead animals scattered throughout the woods. Now, that feeling I felt earlier is starting to make sense and clicking in my head all at once. Some of these animals are bloated and putrid like the first, while others are a little more than skeletons picked clean by scavengers. The smell grows stronger with each passing moment until all I can think about is that nauseating stench. I don't know how much longer I can keep going. My legs, they're feeling like lead, my lungs are burning with exertion. But I know in my heart that I cannot stop, not when this smell is so overpowering. It's like a beacon, leading me deeper and deeper into the woods to my own demise. And that's when I hear it.
This low growling noise coming from somewhere just ahead of me. It's a sound that will forever send shivers down my spine. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I know, deep down, that it is not an animal. It's definitely not anything that I want to meet. But I can't turn back now. I'm trapped in this nightmare with no escape, so all I can do is keep running and hoping to find my way out of this nightmare. I keep on going, and I never actually see where this creature is, this person, or whatever could possibly be lurking out here in this graveyard, I guess. But I just kept running, legs burning, feet hurting, lungs on fire. I honestly thought I was going to collapse and pass out at any moment. And just when I was about to give up and lay down and die, I break the bushes, and there I am, back into a clearing, a road just ahead of me, and there's civilization once more. I don't know how to explain what I went through. I don't even know what the heck was going on out there. I do plan on probably going back sometime soon to see if we can find these bodies, get some video evidence, and see if maybe anybody local has any idea as to what the heck is going on here. Our Ski Trip Turned Nightmare by Jerome Frogman. I remember the excitement as I put on my ski gear and joined my friends for a day on the slopes. The weather was perfect, the fresh snowfall made the scenery even more beautiful. We hit the trails and spent the morning skiing and having a great time. But as the day wore on, we decided to venture off the beaten path and explore the more remote parts of the woods. We thought we knew the area pretty well, but we soon lost ourselves in the dense forest. The snow was falling heavily now. The visibility was rapidly decreasing. The panic didn't really begin to set in until we realized we were completely disoriented and honestly had no freaking idea where to go. We tried to retrace our steps, but the trees and the snow made it almost impossible to recognize any sort of landmark. Of course, as cliche, our freaking phones had no signal. The batteries were running low. We huddled together trying to stay warm, but the cold was honestly biting and relentless. As the night began to fall, strange noises started to fill the forest around me. It sounded like something was moving around us, circling us, if you will. We could hear the sound of branches snapping and footsteps crunching the snow, but we could never actually see anything. We tried to reassure ourselves it was just wildlife, but the noises were getting louder and more menacing. Now I need to stop for a second and explain just how we were feeling mentally. Obviously, physically, we were absolutely cold, we were shaking, and we were terrified. But mentally, I felt like we were pretty all there, we weren't that far away from the ski resort. We were on the slopes just outside of them anyways, in the forest. I mean, we couldn't have gotten too far, right? There's no way we could have gotten that lost. I began to start to feel a strong sense of dread as we realized that we were not alone. We huddled together, scared and unsure of what to do. Then, suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the woods. We froze, too terrified to move. We knew that something was out there, something that meant harm to us. We decided to try to find our way out of those woods regardless of how dark it was. But again, the snow was deep, and our strength waned. We stumbled through the dark, our legs aching and our hearts pounding. We were lost, alone, and at the mercy of the unknown. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping us moving at this point. As the night dragged on, we became more and more exhausted as it got colder and colder. Finally, when we were on the verge of collapse, we saw the lights of our rescue team in the distance. Relief flooded through us as we realized we were going to be rescued. We stumbled towards the lights, our legs weak and our bodies numb. Looking back on that night, though, I've learned so much. I realized how close we came to tragedy. The forest can be dangerous, and it's important to respect its power. I'll never forget the terror of being lost in the woods, hunted by an unknown force, or at least maybe what I felt like was an unknown force, and it's a memory that still haunts me to this very day. Now, I know what a lot of people will think as they hear the end of the story. It was anticlimactic, and how did you even know anything was actually there? Maybe it was just another animal going by. And you know what? You're entirely right. But the adrenaline we got from the fear of the unknown that night is probably what saved us in the first place. Yosemite nearly ended me.
by Anana Possum. I'd always dreamed of hiking in Yosemite National Park. The vast wilderness, stunning landscapes, and the chance to escape the hustle and bustle of city life were what drew me to the great outdoors in the first place. But what I experienced was far beyond what I could have ever imagined. Walking through the forest, I realized I had lost the trail. The trees were so thick and tall that they blocked out the sun, and the dense undergrowth made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me. I tried to retrace my steps, but every tree looked the same, and I found myself wandering through the woods. As the sun began to set, panic set in. I was lost and alone and had no idea how to return to civilization. I tried to use my phone, but of course there was no freaking signal. I had no food or water left, and my legs were aching from all the walking. When I thought things couldn't get any freaking worse, I tripped over a rock hard, hitting my head. When I came to, it was dark and the forest was eerily silent. I tried to stand up, but my legs gave out beneath me. I was injured, lost, and completely alone. Fear completely consumed me. I was gripped by anxiety, and I began to hear strange noises in the distance. Now, I can't tell you for the life of me if this was because of my head injury, and it likely was, but I felt like something was out there, watching me, waiting for me. As the night wore on, my injuries began to worsen. I could feel my body shutting down, and my mind was playing tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves, snap of a twig, seemed like it was something coming to get me, some sort of sinister monster just waiting to eat me. And then I saw it. Again, I can't tell you if it was real or not. It was a dark figure lurking just beyond the trees. It was humanoid but distorted, with long, spindly limbs and glowing eyes. It seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I tried to crawl away, but again my body was far too weak. My head was pounding. Dried blood had made it hard for me to fully open my eyelids. This figure began approaching me. I knew that this would probably be my end if it was not a hallucination. I closed my eyes and waited for my end to come, but when I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone, and the forest was bathed in an eerie light. The following day, I was found by a park ranger barely clinging to life. I had been missing for 2 days. My injuries were severe. I was rushed to the hospital where I spent several weeks recovering from my ordeal. This is something that is real life. Getting lost in the woods is very dangerous, my friends. So please, don't ever go off trail. Even if you see something cool that you want to photograph, even just for a second. Especially if you're alone. I learned my lesson the hard way, and I still to this day have some long-lasting effects from that head injury. Sometimes I still see those images, and I know they're not real. At least I hope they're not.
This happened to me when my pals and I went on a dropping trip. A dropping is when you are dropped at a place that you don't know and you have to find your way home while people in cars hunt for you, and when they spot you, you get a point. The person with the least points who gets to the designated place is the winner. My brother and 6 of my pals were fooling around acting stupid as we always did, causing my dad to say, "Don't you numbskulls have anything better to do?" Like what, Dad? And my dad started thinking, "Well, how about something outside?" To which I just chuckled, but before I could say anything, Terry just said, "What do you guys think about a dropping trip?" We all agreed to this and made our home the place where we had to end up after being dropped. My parents dropped us all off. My mom said, "Okay, let's see how long it takes you guys to travel 20 miles. They drove off, and we all went in different directions. Now at this point I understand 20 miles is a bit excessive. I've always been terrible with directions, so going through the woods probably wasn't the best idea either. I walked around for what seemed like hours until I heard a crying dog. Me being an animal lover, I went to look for what was wrong. I saw a wolf stuck in a bear trap, and I slowly walked toward the trapped wolf. It growled at me, but I slowly started getting closer to help it, with the wolf starting to calm down and allowing me to set it free. The wolf looked at me and then just jumped up and walked off, to which I did the same. After what felt like an hour, I accepted that I was lost, and I just told myself that if I just keep walking in a straight line, I would eventually find my way to a road or something like that. I walked and walked for what felt like hours, but was still stuck in the woods when I heard branches breaking from behind me. My heart was pounding very hard, and I was getting more scared by the minute as the sun was starting to go down. In my mind, I was expecting a huge bear or something like that, but I heard a weird type of growl, more like a gurgling. I started running, which I know is not the smartest thing to do when facing a wild animal, but fear got the better of me in that moment. Not looking where I was running, I tripped and fell, hearing the footsteps gaining fast. It was then I heard barking, and I went to look behind me and saw the wolf I had saved that was barking and standing in front of me. I then looked at the creature that was running after me. It was something that was extremely skinny with claws and was running away now. It ran in a weird way that I can't even describe. It was almost as it wasn't used to running and has never done it before. And then, this thing continued to do that gurgling growl. It was clearly coming from that creature. After the creature was out of sight, the wolf stopped barking, and when I stood up, it was standing right next to me. As I walked again, the wolf didn't leave my side and growled a few times more as I kept walking. Finally, I found a road with a diner, and after a few minutes, I realized it was the diner my dad usually goes to with his friends. So I was relieved to see a familiar sight. I turned my gaze to the wolf, and it was gone. I already began to hear that gurgling growl again, though. I'm pretty sure that wolf protected me and saved my life because I helped it. I've heard many stories of wolves doing this with people, and I'm just absolutely blown away that I was able to experience this. When I was at the door of the diner, I looked back to where the wolf and the creature were supposed to be fighting or whatever, but I didn't see anything. I arrived home last and clearly lost the dropping, but my mom looked at me and said, "What happened to you?" And I told them everything. My cuts from the fall, the wolf, everything. Occasionally, I still talk about this story. I don't think many people believe it, but it's something that I'll forever cherish. But it really freaked the hell out of me. Does anybody have any idea what that creature could have been? From research, it kind of sounds like a skinwalker or a wendigo or something along those lines, but I know that's incredibly cliche. I moved from Idaho to Alaska about 2 months ago, and already I have experienced something I never thought I would ever experience. After taking a week to recover from a 5-day trek across Canada on the Alaska Highway, I decided I was going to get out and explore the wilderness of my new home state and try to catch a glimpse of the wildlife such as moose and bears. The house I'm renting is on the outskirts of the nearest town, so I basically live right in the middle of the forest and have access to miles of dense woods. I still don't know what I'd been thinking when I decided to go into the woods without anything but my phone, which at the time didn't get much service in Alaska, and some earbuds. I began running at a medium pace into the woods, hopping over bushes and branches while jamming out to some shaky graves. I had probably gone through about 5 songs when my shoelace got hooked on a fallen tree and I was thrown to the ground face first. I immediately got back up, swore out of irritation, and began to put my earbuds back in when I realized I had no idea where I was. At some point I had lost my sense of direction and had only but a faint idea as to which direction I had came from. I started to run the way I thought I had came from when I began to panic and second-guess myself, when I realized I should have come out into my backyard ages ago. I didn't want to panic because I knew that it would make everything worse. Panicking never helps. I started to try and pinpoint the right direction. Of course, I eventually realized that I was hopelessly and utterly lost without the slightest indication of which way would bring me to some sort of civilization. After a few brief moments of cursing and groaning, I decided I would follow my gut and go in the direction I thought would possibly lead me home. I started running at full speed, hoping to break the tree line in a matter of minutes, when something on the ground caught my eye. It was a backpack. I stopped instantly and looked around for a person or a campsite, but there was nothing I could see from the spot I was at, which was situated at the bottom of a small hill. The bag looked as if it had been abandoned for quite a few days at least, but was slightly damp from the rain earlier that morning. I kneeled and picked the bag up, resting it against my knees. It had a heavy weight to it when I moved it, so I knew there was something inside. Looking back now, I remember the dark feeling I got in my chest right before I unzipped the main part of the backpack. Inside, there were bags of what I immediately knew were some sort of assortment of illegal drugs and items used to administer them. I quickly stood up and took a step back. I had such a powerful feeling of dread that I felt like I was in imminent danger. I just wanted to get out of there and find my way home, so I started running again to the top of the hill. I was hit with a wave of excitement when I saw a house at the bottom that was buried in the trees. I had begun to start to make my way for it when something told me to stop inside my head. It crept into my mind that what I had just discovered was awfully close to this house. I wanted so badly to be out of the woods and find some form of civilization, but something told me that I just wasn't safe out here. I ran away from the house along the tree line, hoping that I would possibly stumble upon another house. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I stumbled into a neighborhood of sorts and asked a man working in his yard for directions. He was kind enough to drive me home and assure me everybody gets lost in Alaska at some point. As soon as I got home, I showered and chugged some water, then immediately called the police to report what I had seen. However, since I had no idea where I was, I couldn't tell them where to find the drugs or where the house was, so my report was basically useless. I just felt so guilty if I hadn't at least said something. I've driven all over the area down different roads trying to find that house, but I never have. It's probably for the best though, because I don't want to get caught up in something I shouldn't be in. I'm glad I listened to my gut that day and kept running from that house, because people in possession of such many illegal drugs can be extremely dangerous, and I'm just glad I didn't die out there when I got lost. My cousin still loves me telling her this story at 21 with a 2-year-old kid. She always told me to share this with more people, so I guess this is the best way to have more people actually hear this story. It might be a fun campfire story to tell others yourself. Anyway, here it is. There is a legend about these woods that are called the Burberry Witch, a witch that can control some terrifying creatures but will only do so when provoked or angered and will grant you something you want but for a price. My stepfather was a terrible man, hitting my mother, scolding her, and even threatening to seriously hurt myself. It was one of those days when my stepdad began to threaten to beat me, so I went to my room, locked it, and threw my head into the pillow of the bed, avoiding hearing any of the screaming. The day after, my mom knocked on my door and said that he had apologized like he had done all those times before, but my mom, she looked different. Almost a dead sort of look in her eyes. She then said that we would go to the cabin at the lake that used to belong to my grandparents, which they left to us after they died, and I just started packing. I wasn't very excited about it at all. We arrived at the cabin and I unpacked in my room. Of course, my stepfather wanted something and we were too slow to get it to him, so the scolding began. He would sit in a chair and just gulp the beer down like lemonade. He ordered my mom to get him stuff the whole time and was degrading her. I was so angry again, but I knew that I wasn't strong enough to take down anybody. Then, it was time for dinner, and we sat down at the kitchen table. It was still fairly sunny at that time, and it was then that he threw a plate of food at my mom, and tried to pull my hair, but I got away. It was then that I could no longer take it. I headbutted him, which made him fall, and he yelled something obscene at me. I then burst out of the door running into the woods, not looking back for a second, crying and just going God knows where. After a while, I fell onto my knees, just crying until I heard a noise. I looked up and there was a mountain lion. Out of fear, I fell backward on my hands with the mountain lion hissing at me, and I knew I would die right then and there. Then, out of nowhere, the mountain lion was grabbed by a massive claw with razor-sharp nails, followed by what sounded like a bear shouting and terrified. I closed my eyes. The mountain lion was making a huge ruckus that suddenly stopped, and immediately I felt fluids flow over me. It felt like a bucket of water being emptied over yourself. After 2 thuds, I slowly opened my eyes, and there it stood. A creature that looked like a black bear but bigger, with glowing blue eyes, and I noticed the claws that grabbed the mountain lion belonged to it. It growled, and I was so scared it would attack me when I heard clapping. The creature then just went on all fours and ran back into the woods. I checked myself and saw I was covered in blood. It had to be the blood of the mountain lion, but before I could get up, I heard a voice saying, "Oh my sweetie, are you all right?" A woman was now standing over me, extending her hand and smiling. I accepted her hand and she pulled me up to say afterward, "Sweetie, you seem to be covered in blood from that nasty mountain lion." The woman checked me and I checked her. Her hair was black with white parts in it and her eyes were a gorgeous baby blue. "Well, why don't we go to my house so you can freshen up? Okay, sweetie?" she said with a huge smile, and since I felt no ill intent coming from the woman, I went with her. We arrived at a huge wooden house, and after the woman showed me where to freshen myself up, clearing the blood from my clothes and body, I sighed. "Oh, my goodness, what a huge sigh for such a young sweet thing like you." And I sat in the chair that the woman had prepared for me and told her everything. She stroked my cheek and said, "Well, after a few hours we shall go to your mom, and I'm sure that awful man will get what's coming to him. But for now, just close your eyes and sleep, sweetie." As she stroked my head, I fell asleep. The next morning I woke up and I was startled to see that I saw the head of a wolf. After I looked again, I noticed it was a carpet with a wolf head, and man, did I feel stupid. "Oh, so you are awake, sweetie. Now, here, have some breakfast," the woman said, and put a plate on the table near me. I got up and saw it was my favorite, pancakes. I ate as many as I could and I heard the woman giggle. "It tasted well, it seemed," she said with a huge smile, which she followed with, "Well, it's time to get you back now, sweetie." I really didn't want to go back to that man and got a little mad at the thought of seeing him, but the woman grabbed my hand and smiled. We started walking and I couldn't believe how far I had to run the night before as we walked. We heard a sort of chirping growl. I can't explain it any other way than that because it sounded like a bird if it would growl. The woman turned her head away from me and I could see she was looking angry at the direction the sound was coming from and waved her hand. The next thing I heard were some wings flapping, but couldn't see a bird or anything except the branches of the trees moving as we walked further. We arrived at the cabin and I knocked. My mom opened the door and just threw her arms around me. She hugged me tightly before we heard him saying, "The twerp's back and brought an old hag as well." The woman just said, "My sir, that is not a kind thing to say, but if I could please use your bathroom," and my mom looked at my stepdad. "Fine, just don't take too long." I walked the woman to the bathroom. She put a bag of coffee on the table nearby. My mind was trying to figure out when she had grabbed a bag since I was sure she didn't take one with her when we left. I walked a little with her to the bathroom, but I heard my stepdad yelling at my mom, "I'm going to go fish in a bit, and that hag better be gone." As soon as he stopped yelling, I noticed the woman was gone and I opened the bathroom where she was now not there. Now I started looking all over for her, and when I looked out the kitchen window I saw her standing at the boat. How did she get there that fast without even going through any of the doors? The doors do creak after all. The woman clearly saw me and put her finger against her lip, winking at me. The kitchen door then slammed shut and it was my stepdad who just put his hand on my mouth, gripping it tightly while saying, "Don't think I forgot about you, little troublemaker, because after I'm done fishing, you're mine." He let me go, and I heard the toilet flush and saw the woman coming out of the bathroom. In my mind, I was telling myself, how is this happening? She looked sternly at my stepdad, then walked out to the cool box, which was without a doubt filled with alcohol, and walked to the boat. He got on the boat when my mom walked into the kitchen and hugged me again. "I'm so happy you're okay, darling," she said with a sob in her voice, and the woman then put her hand on my mom's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, dear, that awful man will be receiving payback for everything he has done to the both of you very, very soon." And the woman quickly followed it up by asking if we wanted some tea, and of course we said yes. My mom and I just saw my stepdad struggling to reel something in. I then saw a huge spiked fin breaking the water. Then quickly, it went down in the water again. "Oh, sweetie, did you see something in the water?" the woman just blurted out of nowhere, sipping on tea. How could she possibly be sipping tea already? There was no way that the water would be warm enough for tea. But the woman just asked, "Are you going to have your tea, dears?" There were cups of warm tea standing in front of us. Then we heard the water stirring and saw the fin again. Then out of nowhere, a creature came out of the water, jumping on the boat. It was covered in scales that were green and blue, and its head looked like a piranha with webbed fingers and pointy nails. Suddenly, it slashed at my stepdad and hit his arm. My stepdad fell, and the creature went right after my stepdad. "Oh, what day is it today, dear?" was all the woman said as the creature was attacking my stepdad, to which my mom could barely make out, "It's Wednesday." The woman signed, which she followed, No, what a terrible thing of me to do. How could I forget to feed it yesterday?" After which she took a sip of her tea. Then we saw an arm flying out of the boat and blood was still flying everywhere. The lower half of the foot followed after as we watched in horror to what was happening in the boat. The creature went down even more, and when it was rising, it had the head of my stepdad in its mouth, lifting the body of my stepdad as well. We could see his blood-soaked clothing and the blood dripping from his neck. Then the creature slammed its jaws together, making the body of my stepdad drop, the blood dripping from the creature's mouth. With the body of my stepdad lying half out of the boat and half in the creature's mouth, it jumped back into the water. I and my mom, shocked by what we had witnessed. The woman just said, "Well, sweetie, I told you that awful man was going to get what was coming to him," and she put her cup down. "Oh my, you haven't touched your tea yet," she calmly said as she was walking out of the kitchen door and stopped. She turned her head around to us and said with a smile, "This one shall require no pay, as I despise such men, and you are always welcome to my woods, but please do not bring another like him, or there will be a payment." She walked to the edge of the wooded area and where the bear creature stood, and she stroked its chin while presenting a devilish smile on her face. Blue Ridge Hiking Experience by Ty H26. This happened a couple of weeks ago. It was a sunny day. My wife and I decided to go hiking and have a picnic. This was in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We got our backpacks out and began hiking when we arrived at a parking area. We eventually came to a river. It seemed like an excellent place to have our picnic. It appeared to be peaceful at first. My wife laid down a blanket and we started pulling out our food. We just had some sandwiches, lemonade, bottled water, and some cookies. Nothing too crazy. It was a lovely day with fantastic scenery. Regardless of all the beauty, I started having an uneasy feeling. I didn't say anything to my wife about the feeling. I didn't want to worry her. A few minutes later, we heard a rustling in the trees in the woods. We looked around, but we didn't see anything. My wife says, "I don't like it here." She said she felt spooked from the time we sat down. I thought we were being watched as well. Even the hair on my arms and neck was standing up. We hear more rustling. I told my wife we should start back to the truck instead of finishing our hike. For whatever reason, we decided to leave our food in case it was a hungry animal. I know, this was a dumb idea. We started going back to our truck and my wife said, Do you hear that?" I said, "Yes, just keep walking." There was more rustling behind us, and whatever it was had started to follow us. The footsteps got louder and closer. The footsteps didn't sound like that of a human. Whatever it was big. My wife started to get nervous because we both thought if we left the food behind, we would be okay, and it would just go for the food. I guess we were wrong. I started feeling like we were on the menu for whatever was stalking us. My wife had tears running down her face, and I took her hand and told her to start walking faster. I was afraid for us to run in case whatever was following us was actually a predator, like a mountain lion or a bear, and would start chasing us and run us down. Whatever it was stayed with us, but we couldn't see a single thing. We kept moving, and were getting tired. We still kept going, though. Finally, we made it to the parking area where our truck was. I looked around, but I still didn't see anything. We threw the backpacks in and hopped into the truck as fast as we could. I backed up and then put the car into drive. I floored the gas pedal. We were so relieved, but also terrified. We didn't say anything for quite a few minutes, but then as we were getting down the road, my wife asked, What do you think it was?" I said, "I have no idea. I'm not sure I really believe in Bigfoot, but I don't think this was a bear. Whatever this was, it was on 2 feet. It sounded big and heavy. It stalked us. I've never been this afraid in my life. We won't ever go back to this area again. It reminded me of a classic horror movie, but this was real. It's only been a few weeks since then, and I'm still scared because I wonder what could have happened if I had not chosen to return to my truck and leave instead of continuing to hike. Thank you, Swamp Dweller, if you tell my story. People should know the importance of being alert to their surroundings in the wilderness. As I've heard others say, I believe there could be things we don't know about." Near Miss on the Pacific Crest Trail by Oryx Temple. A few years ago, I was hiking the southern portion of the Pacific Crest Trail in Washington State. It was late June, so it was warm enough that water sources were valuable. I made camp toward the end of the day in a mildly used site. It was just a few feet off the trail, but not deep into the woods by any means. A babbling brook was easily about 50 feet away from me, so I felt comfortable. As I was heating my water on my tiny stove for dinner, an older, 60-ish-year-old man walked down the trail. He saw me and hollered to ask if I had any water. He wore regular jeans, sneakers, and a white button-down t-shirt. There was no backpack or anything, and this was pretty odd to me. I was far enough down the trail, maybe 10 miles or so, from any road that a day hiker would have been extremely rare at that point. I welcomed him into my camp and gave him water from a jug. He drank it, thanked me, then walked on. I thought it was odd enough, and it stuck in my mind, but I didn't freak out too much about it. Following week, I came off the trail to a nearby town and learned a massive search for a guy in his 60s wearing jeans, sneaker, and a casual white button-down shirt had been underway. He had abandoned his car near the Pacific Crest Trail and was on the run from the feds for money laundering and other white-collar crimes. I never did learn if they found him. I often wonder how far he got without gear, food, or water. A small part of me hopes he got away. A Traumatic Hiking Trip by Anonymous. This incident happened quite a few years ago, so I apologize for the confusing information. I'm just writing what I remember. So one day in the summer of 2017, it was a gloomy day at our walk start, but that's irrelevant. My best friend and I had decided to go for a hike. This time we decided to take the trail, even though we usually just walked off-trail wherever we wanted. We took a break as we got to a bench, which was just over halfway through the trail. A young girl and her dog were jogging down the mountain, nothing unusual, so we assumed it was safe to go to the top. Once we got to the last turn before the top, I began to feel very uneasy, but we continued anyway. Near the top was a slope with lots of rocks and rubble. I could see 3 or 4 men at the top conversing behind a bush, so I stopped dead in my tracks. I heard one of the men say frantically, "Hide the body! Hide the bag!" He said it just loud enough that my best friend and I knew what he had said. My friend took a couple of steps forward to see if it was just some teens messing with us, but it was indeed a small group of men with a body bag. I never saw the bag personally. I never saw the body or any of the men's faces. So me and my best friend said quietly, "What do we do?" Then we gave each other that "get me the hell out of here" look and booked it for dear life. None of the men followed us, and we safely descended the mountain. We made a police report because my best friend saw the bag, the men, and some old blood on the bag. Despite the local police not believing us, they scraped the mountain and searched everywhere. They initially didn't believe us and found nothing. But shortly after this encounter, a news report came out about an Australian guy that went missing, and his remains were found in my hometown. Then the pieces started to click in my head. I believe the man was killed before they brought his body to the mountain to dispose of it. If you think about it, they probably wanted the body found if they were stupid enough to ditch it on a public mountain with a hiking trail. Of course, the news report never mentioned me or my best friend reporting this, because who would believe 2 teenagers, I guess, plus a search team had found the remains of the poor guy, so of course they're going to get all the credit. I still don't know to this day why this happened, but all I can say is I'd never lie about witnessing something like this. It was truly messed up, and I think about it every single day. When I would hear the adage, "right place at the right time," I'd think to myself, yeah, okay, it's all just coincidence. But after what I've been through these past 6 weeks, my mind is changing. Maybe you are put in a specific place at a specific time for a reason, but I digress. As most of you know, the Pacific Northwest, for those unfamiliar, was recently ravaged by an ungodly number of wildfires. Seeing all the little fire emojis dotted all around the maps of California, Oregon, and Washington made my heart ache. My home was burning. Fortunately for myself and my family, our area had not been hit as hard as many others. I had planned on camping for quite a few weeks prior to this pandemic of wildfires, so I was happy to see that my usual spot was not near any major fires and subsequently had been deemed safe to camp and travel in. I am a camping enthusiast and enjoy deep wilderness camping on the Pacific Crest Trail as much as I can.
My usual spot is remote. It requires an hour drive up a 2-lane road into the middle of nowhere. This is followed by a 30-minute drive up an old logging road that ultimately crests a small mountain. The mountain slope leads into a beautiful valley, with much larger mountains encircling the valley from the north and east. In the center was a decently sized clearing, a valley if you will. The clearing was littered with fallen logs, beautiful pink and yellow yarrow flowers, and the occasional family of white-tailed deer. This was my true happy place. This valley does have a name, but I will keep it hidden for anonymity purposes. I left on a Tuesday morning in early September. The drive to the mountain was relatively uneventful. Besides almost hitting a large buck who decided to cross the road right in front of my truck, I arrived on the mountain's crest and began unpacking the bed of my truck. I had just recently bought a new 2020 Toyota Tacoma. I parked my truck facing the clearing. Roughly 5 feet from the edge of the small drop-off, the slope down to the valley wasn't steep and is very easy to hike down. I would definitely call it a beginner's trail. I'd say it's about 400 to 450 feet from where I parked down to the valley floor. I had camp set up just as dusk was setting. I usually would have a large fire going, but with the previously mentioned wildfires, that was not really going to be possible. I brought a small propane stove and a space heater to prevent any accidents. As I finished gulping down my last bite of dinner, I noticed it was quickly growing dark. I hopped off my tailgate and made it into my driver's side door. As I was digging in my pockets for my keys, I looked down into the valley and noticed something quite strange. I could make out 2 circular small lights in the far distance. They flickered as they quickly moved closer to the clearing. It looked as if they were hovering and navigating through the trees at a steady pace. I crouched down in front of the truck and looked on, curiously. I watched for a few minutes until the lights eventually arrived at the tree line of the clearing. I could hear the humming of a motorcycle engine or something like that echoing from the valley. That's when I realized what I was staring at. What on earth were these 2 people doing riding dirt bikes all the way out here, in the dark? This was the first time I had ever seen another person out there. The lights were stationary at this point. I assumed the 2 riders were off their bikes and walking around the clearing. Although that is only speculation, as I couldn't see anything aside from the 2 bike headlights. I knew they couldn't see me as of yet, as I had no visible lights or a campfire. I instantly thought to grab my phone out of my glove box. Local news stations warned the public of suspected people intentionally starting fires in the woods. They encouraged citizens to be vigilant and gather any evidence they could. In an absolute lapse of judgment, I pressed the unlock button on my keys. My truck lights flashed, and a loud beeping sound rang out. I had just given a beacon of my location to these midnight riders. In a rush of adrenaline, I threw myself on the ground stomach first. My mind was screaming, "Good going, Einstein!" I could barely think as my heart was pounding in my ears. I watched as the bike lights began to turn back in the direction they came from, and eventually disappeared into the darkness. I could hear the engines revving harder than they had before. That unsettled me a bit. As I stood up and brushed myself off, I began thinking about how odd it was. Usually, people with good intentions do not run off like that when they notice another camper. These people were obviously up to no good down there. Maybe drug traffickers, meth cookers, arsonists. My mind was filled with all the potential threats I might have alerted to my location. I sat in my truck and mulled over the options. Should I drive home? What if they were waiting for me at the end of the logging road? Was I overreacting? I decided to pack up camp and spend the night in my truck and drive home first thing in the morning. After packing everything up, I drove down the logging road a little way and backed into a small gap in the mountain face. That way, if the midnight riders decided to pay me a visit, they might miss me. I was in full paranoia mode. I lowered my seat back, racked around in my shotgun, and eventually dozed off as adrenaline turned into exhaustion. I awoke to my alarm, with "My Life for Hire" by A Day to Remember blaring from my phone. In a groggy daze, I sat up and rubbed my eyes. My phone said 6:32 a.m. Looking out my windshield, I could see some thick brown smoke swirling in the wind. As I stepped out of my truck, I was hit with the intense smell of burning wood. As you guessed it, there was a fire very close by. I jumped back into my truck and raced back up the mountain. From my camping spot, I'd be able to get a better understanding of the situation. As I drove up way too fast up this narrow logging road, I noticed the smoke was thinning out as my elevation grew. My heart sank at this realization. When I reached the crest, I jumped out into the truck bed and looked out over the valley. I could see blue skies above the mountains across from me, to the north and east. My heart sank as I confirmed my suspicion. I turned towards the logging road to my right. I could see the smoke thicken from that direction. I was trapped. My mind instantly went to the two riders from the previous night. I grabbed my phone, praying for a signal. Of course, I had no such luck. I jumped off my truck bed and threw my passenger door open. I frantically searched for my backpack. I ripped it apart. Once I found it, looking for my GPS satellite phone, I kissed it with joy when I grabbed it from the bottom of the bag, flipped it open, and thanked the Lord I had a signal. I called 911 to report the fire and request help. I chatted with the operator for somewhere around 15 minutes or so. The operator said she'd connect and have local wildlife firefighting companies come out ASAP and attempt to get a helicopter to evacuate me. After being on hold for a few minutes, I was transferred to a helicopter pilot with a wildland firefighting company that was nearby. I mentioned the valley by name and the man said he knew where it was. He claimed they were sending a helicopter to pick me up and that I needed to be there and ready to leave as soon as they landed. After we disconnected, I rushed to clear out my truck of any valuables. Sadly, rubbed the dashboard and said sorry to my new truck as it was evident the fire would eventually consume her. I then gradually started making my way down the slope into the valley. After only falling a few times, I reached the valley floor. I bolted through the trees towards the clearing. My lungs were on fire as I was nearing the clearing. As I broke through the tree line, I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. After only a few minutes of lying there, catching my breath, I got back into my feet. I started walking towards the center of the clearing. When I got to what I assumed was the center, I glanced up at the peak of the small mountain. I could see my bright red truck sitting there where I left it. Roughly 200 feet off the left was a wall of fire. Black smoke was rising from the wall as it raced up the mountain. I turned away, not wanting to watch $39,000 literally go up in flames. I began scanning the sky, searching for my rescue. I concentrated on listening to the chopping sounds of helicopter rotors. As I stood there listening, I heard something else that made me question my sanity. Just off to my left, I could hear someone crying. A shockwave ran through me. I stood there, unable to believe my ears. I upholstered my handgun and called out, "Hello? Someone there?" I then began to hear a muffled screaming. I ran towards the screaming and trying to hold back tears. I noticed a piece of plywood, roughly 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, covered in branches and dirt. It was laying on the ground with a large boulder set on top. I called out, "Hello?" I heard the muffled screaming again, this time much louder and unmistakable. Is someone really under this plywood? I thought to myself. I rushed to move the boulder. After struggling for a few minutes, I finally managed to push the boulder off the plywood. I slowly lifted it up and threw it to the side. What I saw was something I will never forget. Sitting inside a small hole, probably no bigger than 4 feet by 4 feet, was a woman. Her wrist zip-tied and her mouth gagged with a piece of cloth. I gasped and took a step back. I couldn't believe it. What the hell was going on? The woman was frantically looking around. I snapped out of shock and rushed to help her. She flinched as I reached out to grab her. I lifted her out of the hole. I took the cloth from her mouth as she frantically started yelling in Spanish and raising her arms. I told her to calm down, "You're safe now." I cut the zip ties that were binding her wrist. She instantly started pointing behind me, repeating, "Mi hija." I didn't understand her or really what that meant. I knew no Spanish. I turned around and quickly see 4 more pieces of plywood scattered across the clearing. I was horrified. I rushed over and started to flip them over one by one, but they were empty. The woman, following me as I did this, let out a painful cry as I flipped the last piece of plywood over, exposing a 4th and final empty hole. She collapsed on the ground and began sobbing. I tried to ask her what was wrong, but I couldn't understand her. As I attempted to console her, I could hear the distinct sound of helicopter rotors. I looked up to see the chopper descending into the valley. I helped the woman up and put her arm over my shoulder as we rushed away to the awaiting chopper. A man jumped out of the side doors. As we reached out, he said,
"You didn't tell us there was 2 of you."
I yelled back, trying to be heard over the rotors. "I just found her. I have no idea what is happening." He replied with,
You found her. What are you? Never mind, we don't have time. Get in."
He helped me get into the helicopter and shut the doors. Soon after we started to ascend, I looked down over the valley to see the fire engulfed the peak and was halfway down the slope towards the valley. I sat back in relief. I was finally safe, but I had so many questions. The state police and EMTs met us as we landed back at the base camp. I explained the entire situation and they took the woman and me back to the station.
Eventually, I was released after retelling my story to 6 different officers. My wife picked me up and I was able to return home. That was not the end, unfortunately. Over the last 6 weeks, I have been interviewed by local authorities, state authorities, the US Marshals, ICE, and even a pair of FBI agents. My final interview was with the 2 FBI agents. They were the only ones who gave me any real information on the situation. After retelling my story just as I did here, they filled in some holes for me. They explained to me I most likely stumbled upon a human trafficking operation. When I unlocked my truck, it spooked them. He said I was lucky that I hid in that gap when I did, as they most likely went up the logging road to quote-unquote handle me. When they couldn't locate me, they probably assumed I had left to get the police, so they packed up any valuable assets, including the woman's young daughter, and started a fire to destroy any evidence before I could alert the authorities. I asked about the girl. The older agent informed me that she and her daughter were kidnapped from Nicaragua. The woman claimed that they were set to be sold to a wealthy Russian oligarch. She was being held in government custody until she could be returned home safely, he said. She's lucky you came along when you did. You were at the right place, at the right time.
Fresh out of high school, my friends and I decided to take one last trip together before we all split up to go to college. The Pacific Crest Trail was the destination. A few nights of drinking, hiking, and camping was exactly what we needed together. Ian, my boyfriend, picks me up from my house. I've never been to the Pacific Crest Trail, so he tries describing its beauty the best he can. Babe, you're gonna love it, I promise. Nothing but fresh air and wilderness. We will be one with nature. I'm not so sure Mother Nature would approve of the ungodly amount of alcohol you have in the cooler. Well, what about this? Ian pulls out a sandwich-sized Ziploc bag of weed. I know Mother Nature would approve of this. She grew it. You've been holding out on me, I said, snatching the bag from his grip. I open it and take a deep breath, inhaling the familiar aroma. It's a long ride. Might as well roll one up for the road. Sounds good. I'll call the others and get them to meet us at the location. Ian connects his phone on his Jeep radio, putting on his 80s hair metal playlist. I light the freshly rolled joint, and we settle in for a road trip. We decided to meet up at the Bridge of Gods. The Bridge of the Gods sits at the convergence of the historic Columbia River Highway State Trail, 3 National Historic Trails, and the Pacific Crest Trail. We walk over the bridge together, being extra careful because there is no shoulder on the narrow bridge, and we must share with cars and trucks. We make it across with no problem and hike for a while until we decide to go off-trail to find a spot to set up camp by the river. 3 tents between 6 people, Nova and his girlfriend Tessa, the twins, Sadie and Katie, and finally myself and Ian. I sit back with a black cherry white claw and take in the beautiful, beautiful surroundings. The sky let out an orange glow as the sun sank behind the jagged mountains. The mountains came down to meet the cold, untamed river. Nova and Ian began to make a fire before the night came. As the darkness falls, the alcohol flows. The flicker of the flame lights the night. We all reminisce about high school and talk about all that we would like to do for our future. Ian gets quiet and stares off into the darkness that is the river. What's up, Ian? I ask. I think I can see the outline of a boat floating not far off the bank. We all look in that direction. Ian pointed. Yeah, I think I see it too, Katie said. Nova walks over to his backpack and pulls something out. He twirls it in his hand and looks at it for a moment, before putting it in the direction of what we think is the boat. Is that a gun? Put that up, Nova. I spoke. Chill out, Brittany. It's just a flare gun, Ian said as he grabbed my hand to calm me. Nova pulls the trigger, and a trail of light streaks out towards the boat. It lights up the immediate area around the dark outline. It was a boat. Not just our mind playing tricks on us in the dark. 2 people stood in the flat-bottomed boat, looking our way. They wore orange hoodies that hid their face. Oh my god. People are watching us, Sadie said. Get the hell out of here, you damn weirdos, Nova shouted. Nova and Ian began picking up rocks on the riverbank and throwing them at the boat. After a few moments, we could hear the engine start and drive away. We finally get over being freaked out. We did our best to put the incident behind us and continued drinking and partying throughout the night before eventually passing out in our tents. I woke the following day to a commotion outside. I unzipped the tent and dragged myself out. The sun hit my eyes and I winced as a sharp pain shot through my head. Drinking obscene amounts of alcohol seems like a great idea until the next day, when you have to wake up with a splitting headache and you get a queasy gut. I see Ian with his hands clasped on top of his head, standing in front of a flat-bottomed boat and sat on the riverbank on our campsite. "Ian, what's wrong? What's going on?" I ask. "These assholes from last night, they docked our boat here, stole all of our supplies while we were sleeping." Nova walks up behind us. "I'm having trouble finding the trail. I have some food and water stashed away in my tent. Let's refuel and go look like a group." After eating, with no supplies, we decided to cut our trip short, pack up, and look for the trail we strayed from to get to this riverbank. "Let's split up," Nova said. "We can go in pairs of 2. Try not to stray too far from the others, so if you find the trail, you can alert the others by yelling." Nova and Tessa enter the woods. Sadie and Katie enter about 20 yards away, and Ian and I do the same. Ian grabs my hand and he leads the way. We say nothing to each other, only the sound of twigs breaking and brush under our feet fill the silence. "I think I see something," Ian said. I look around to try and see what he sees, and that's when I notice it. I think we both figure out what it was at the same time by the terrified look we gave each other. 2 hours left. A man in a bright orange hunting hoodie stood several yards away. He didn't move. He just looked at us. A camouflage ski mask covered his face. He didn't move even when we ran into the opposite direction of him. Even without being chased, we ran as fast as we could, leading to me tripping over some undergrowth and falling. My extended hands were the only thing stopping me from slamming my face into the unforgiving ground. A sharp pain shot through my wrist into my elbow. I let out a yelp in pain. I'm not sure if it's broken, but I know it's at least sprained. The price I had to pay to save my face from colliding with the forest floor. Ian quickly comes to my side, helping me up and inspecting the hand. I held it close to my body. He flexed the wrist, sending a shockwave of pain through my arm, causing me to jerk my hand away. Behind him, I noticed some movement. It was one of the men in the orange hoodie stepping out from behind some trees. I point a shaky finger behind Ian at the man. Ian glances over his shoulder to see what has me so shaken. "We'll check this out later. Right now we have to run." Ian grabs my elbow, careful not to touch my hurt wrist. We make a hard left and quickly make our way to what is hopefully the trail we came in on. We break through the trees, but it's not the trail. It's a small clearing. It looks like someone has recently been here. A still smoldering fire set in the center of the small clearing. Sadie and Katie break through the brush into the clearing a few feet away from where we came in, followed by Nova and Tessa shortly, to the right of where we came in. We all share stories, and they all sound very similar. "These men funneled us to this spot," Katie said. "Why do they want us here? What do they want?" Nova responded. "Well, you did shoot a flare at them," I say to Nova. "The creeps were floating there watching us. What was I supposed to do?" "Stop fighting. It'll get us nowhere. We need to figure out how to get back to the trail," Sadie interrupted. We looked around the clearing. It was roughly about half the size of an NFL football field. There was nothing out of the ordinary other than the smoldering pile of coals left behind. "Let's turn around together and enter the woods and search for the trail. It has to be close," Ian said. We began to walk towards the section of woods we had entered the clearing through, and several of the men with orange hoodies and camouflage masks stepped out of the tree line. We turned as a group and began running in the opposite direction. We got halfway to the other side of the clearing before there were more men wearing the same orange hunting hoodies and camouflage masks stepping out. More emerged from the tree line surrounding us. I'm pretty sure there were 12 of them in total. Some of them had rifles in hand. Our group huddles together as it looked like these hunters were slowly closing in around us. 2 hunters grab the twins, Sadie and Katie, and begin to drag them away, kicking and screaming. Ian and Nova run towards the 2 hunters that grab the twins. Nova throws a punch that connects with the hunter's chin and drops him to the ground. Nova grabs Sadie by the hand to help her up when a loud boom fills the air. The unexpected explosion temporarily disorients me. My ears ring. I look around confused about what just happened and where the explosion came from. I hear Sadie let out a terrified scream. I look to see her coated in blood and Nova lying on the ground beside her. Ian turns around, running away from the scene unfolding before us. The look of fear in his face let me know exactly what had just happened. One of the hunters with a rifle had shot Nova. Ian took about 2 steps before another shot rang out. Blood spray came out of the side of Ian's head like a lawn sprinkler. Ian drops mid-stride, pulls her into the nearest tree line, and I hush her violent screams. No additional words are needed as we began to both sprint away from the chaos. I feel terrible about leaving Sadie and Katie to die. But any other action than what I took would have led to all of our deaths. I could hear the hunters scrabbling after us. At least, that's what was running through my mind at that moment. Tessa and I ran full speed for what felt like miles. My legs burned, my lungs hurt, and I would not dare to slow down. To my relief, we stumbled upon the trail. I look around to regain my sense of direction. "The bridge is this way," I yelled to Tessa, and we began sprinting again. We ran to the bridge, where we flagged down a car, and they called the emergency number to alert the police. I was frantic, trying to explain to the officer what I saw, that we ran off, leaving our friends to die. Tessa could only weep. She tried to tell her version, but she couldn't get the words out. Tessa was physically shaking, and instead of words, vomit was the only thing that came from her mouth. Several hours had passed, and the sun was starting to set when the officers found my friends. The hunters had erected 2 wooden crosses that Sadie and Katie hung from. Their abdomens sliced open, and the twins were connected by their intestines tied together. Their guts decorated the wooden structure they hung from like a set of gory Christmas lights. Ian and Nova lay at the foot of the crosses. I don't know the reason behind the gruesome slaughter of my friends, but I do know I'll never revisit the Pacific Crest Trail.
This happened about 5 years ago. My mom, dad, and I were camping at Mary Jane Thurston State Park, just outside of Grand Rapids, Ohio. It was sometime around the end of August or the beginning of September, and our campsite was in the front part of the campgrounds. Leading up to the 2 separate incidents, we occasionally heard what we thought could have been a bird of some kind screaming or screeching up in the trees, or at least it sounded like it was coming from the top of the trees. We'd hear it almost every single night, but in a different location. We'd listen to it in the trees behind us, and then the next night it would come from the other end of the campground. Then the night after, we'd hear it from across the road. I've listened to the sounds of different animals, including owls, to see if it was the noise we were hearing, but nothing was even close. Occasionally, we would hear what sounded like branches being snapped, but we thought nothing of it really. I had my tent, and that detail is essential as it factors into the second incident. The first incident that I want to talk about happened when my dad woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like someone rummaging through the ice chest between our tents. He said he heard whoever or whatever it was shut the cooler and walk away. He told my mom and me about it the next day. The odd thing was that everything was present in the cooler. Nothing seemed to be missing. The second incident happened the night after the first one, and I had a small TV and game console in my tent. It was like one of those portable ones that you could plug things into. It was pretty cool. I was watching a movie when I heard something approaching our campsite. Whatever went through our cooler, then I think was doing the same thing the next night. I could listen to the ice moving around as it was rummaging through it. I was as still and as quiet as possible, but whoever or whatever was there knew I was awake because it decided to put its massive hand on the side of my tent and push it in just a little bit. I was frozen with fear and didn't know what to do. It felt like forever, but was only about 20 seconds before it took its hand away from my tent and walked away. I didn't even think about it. I was looking everywhere. I looked for tracks the next day the moment light went out, but I didn't see anything. As far as I know, we don't really have bears in this part of Ohio, so I don't think it was a bear.
Despite going through it twice, this thing didn't take anything from the ice chest. I was afraid. When it touched my tent and pushed it in a little bit, I think I might have even peed a little bit. We don't think it was a homeless person, and we're pretty sure it wasn't other campers, as there wasn't many other people in the campground with us. But I'm not saying it wasn't any of those options. But I'm just a bit freaked out. In 2010, when I was in much better shape than I am now, I hiked the Pinnacle Trail at Table Rock State Park in South Carolina. I was the only one on the mountain in early April, and early in the day. The trail reaches to the top. It took me about 2 hours to get to the top. It was beautiful, and I rested up there for a bit. I had a snack and some water, and then, after some time, I decided to head back down. I was about 30 minutes from the entrance when I noticed I didn't hear a single sound. Nothing at all. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no wind, no bugs, birds, running water, absolutely nothing. It was like I was in the vacuum of absolute sound being taken away. For context, there is running water and streams all around the trail, and they're usually easily heard and very loud. I tapped my ear with my finger to see if I could still hear, and I could. I looked around, blinking and thinking, what the heck? I guess it's like what a bug feels like when you trap it in a glass jar. Then, out of nowhere, like a baseball hitting you in the face, the smell hit me. Having raised many hunting dogs and pets when I was younger, it was like a doghouse bed that hadn't been cleaned in quite a while, except it was 10 times more pungent. I almost became sick. There was something there. There was no doubt in my mind, but it stayed hidden. I looked around everywhere. Nothing but the odor was all around me. I carry a pistol in most places I go. I have a concealed carry permit. I didn't even think of drawing it, though. I didn't think it would do any good. I finally booked it out of there. Screw this noise. I felt like I had to get out of there. About 30 yards up, I see a doe eating grass. She looks at me and doesn't seem to be scared, which is very odd. Most deer haul ass when they see you. I continued down the trail like a bat out of hell. The sound came back at some point further down the trail. I caught a young couple entering the park when I reached the entrance. I must have looked like I had seen a ghost or something, maybe even a little bit like a crackhead. They looked at me like I had 3 heads, with one coming out of my ass. I left and went home. I had forgotten all about this until one day I was listening to scary stories I had discovered on YouTube about a year after while painting my house. I stopped immediately when I heard a very similar instance being told. It was like that vacuum or silence someone had experienced while in the woods. I found out later some people call this the Oz effect or the silence. This story took place in Thermopolis, Wyoming. At the beginning of June of 2023, my girlfriend and I stayed there for a week-long vacation. We walked by the Hot Springs State Park River one night after dinner. Across the river and up the bank, the road goes past T Hill. It is named for the letter T and is made of white rock on its side to represent Thermopolis. The year previous, I hiked up this hill. A small portion of the trail is visible from the road, and you can see bits and pieces continuing upward if you look closely. I'm very familiar with it as it took me an hour or so to reach the top, and I have visited Thermopolis and the park many times. Back to the night in question. The sun had just set, some rain was falling, and a storm had passed about an hour or so beforehand. I noticed a bright white-blue light on T Hill as we admired the river. The light was on the established trail moving up. I pointed this light out to my girlfriend. I said it was definitely not a flashlight with the rate of speed it was moving and how smooth it was, as the light was more like a ball than a beam. We both wondered if someone was going on a night hike up a steep, demanding trail in the rain, but we decided that that was probably not the case. The light was moving much faster than any person hiking could. She suggested a person biking up the hill. That was the only logical explanation as far as I could tell. So we stood there and waited to see this person either go around the switchback to continue up the hill or turn back to come down. We returned to our truck and parked it in a lot with a higher vantage point to look for it. The strange light did not reappear, and we waited for easily 20 or 30 minutes. After a short drive back to my mom's house, where we were staying at the time, we told her about what we had seen. She didn't really seem surprised and said the locals and tourists reported strange lights in the hills and mountains visible outside the town and within the park. She also told me that someone had died on the trail years ago, and it was likely many other souls had perished out there as well. Wyoming at night has an unsettling vibe. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach every time I'm out there. It is mostly still a very wild place. The state has the smallest population in the contiguous United States. Lots of paranormal things occur there. The area and surrounding states are notorious for weird activity. I don't have a solid idea of what I saw that night. Maybe a ghost or some kind of extraterrestrial. Or there's the standard explanation, ball lightning or some obscure scientific phenomenon. But no matter what it was, Wyoming is a place in my heart of beauty and somewhat spookiness.
I don't even know where to start. I've been listening to your show for quite some time, and I'm still hesitant to share my stories, but I love your channel and it keeps me company throughout very lonely workdays. I spend all my free time outdoors in the woods or at the national and state parks in my area. I live in a tiny rural community on the edge of a game reserve near the Mississippi River's oldest town, and I've been here my entire life. There is something in the woods down here in the state park though, and we are not alone. Off and on my entire life, I had felt like I was being watched when I was out in the woods. Not every time, but enough to pay attention to it in this area. I am not the type of girl you want to grab a hold of. I can hold my own in a fight, and although I am no Doc Holliday, I am very good with a firearm. But what good would a gun do? You can't kill something that is already dead. Enough rambling. One night, my favorite spots to go rock hunting were in the small creeks and streams on the Natchez Trace. The Trace is a historic forest trail in the United States that is roughly 440 miles long. It's absolutely beautiful, and I do recommend people check it out. I started down the route to the creek. It's about 1.5 miles down a dirt path. I used to do this all the time, so I wasn't very worried. I made my way down to the creek with the help of a live oak branch that I've used many times before. I was on a mission that day to find an arrowhead. It was late afternoon, in the summer, so the weather was terrific. A nice gentle breeze, animals rustling in the leaves, and a symphony of songbirds in the forest canopy. I was enjoying myself, arrowhead or not. I hadn't been paying attention to how long or how far I had been walking, when a beautiful agate caught my eye. Super excited, I bent down to wash it off and put it in my bag. When I was washing the agate off, I noticed the only thing I could hear was the water swishing in my hands. No birds, no bugs, no breeze, no animals scurrying on the forest floor. Still kneeling in the creek, I had an overwhelming feeling of heaviness, like someone had thrown a weighted blanket over me. I was afraid to look up. I had the feeling I was being watched from close by. I finished washing my agate off and putting it in my bag, trying desperately to act as if nothing was wrong. I stood up, fake stretched, side to side, trying to scan the edge of the woods nonchalantly. At that moment, my stomach dropped. I did not recognize where I was. There was no way in hell I got turned around. I was walking up the creek and never got out of the water, but for some reason this place did not seem familiar at all. And at that moment, I realized I had gone too far. The sun seemed to be setting relatively fast, and I was getting lightheaded. Then suddenly, from about 10 or so feet behind me, came a clicking sound and a heavy, deep breath with a gurgling snort. I did not want to turn around, but I had to. It was the only way back.
The water was flowing nicely and smoothly in the opposite direction I was facing, so I knew my truck would be the other way. I immediately started to pump myself up for whatever I was about to see or experience. This was one of the few times I did not have a gun on me, but I did have my knife just in case. I was prepared to go all macho, especially for somebody stalking me. In this case, I would have felt better if it had been another human being, regardless of their intentions. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I did not know a thing, but the woods were still quiet. There was no sound, but the water was splashing, so I stepped my ass out of there. I had to have been about 4 to 5 miles from my truck. I was 36 miles up the track with no ranger stations or homes nearby. I started to quicken my pace when I noticed I was making a considerable amount of noise for just 2 feet, so I quickly stopped. My heart sunk as I heard the rustling of leaves and grass stop shortly after I did. The clicking and gurgling snorts continued. I know the animals we have in these here woods, and they don't make those noises at all. So I quickened my pace, making a ton of noise running down the creek. Whatever was behind me was running along the bank in what sounded like very significant heavy strides. The clicking continued, getting closer and closer. Just then, whatever was behind me let out a scratchy shriek that made me grab my ears in pain. I removed my hands to hear it jump down into the water. I knew it was close and significant because it sent a surge down the creek. I hit a gear I never even knew I had, and no way in hell I would try to turn around and get a look at whatever this thing was. As I reached familiar surroundings, I could see the live oak getting around the bend of the tree, as if it was reaching out to help me. I knew that at that point the truck wasn't very far away. At the time, I was a pack-a-day smoker of Marlboro Reds, and my lungs felt like they would explode from the pain. So I reached out, grabbed the live oak, and my hand slipped. Just as I caught it again with a better grip, I began to pull myself up. Then I felt something tight and painful, almost like a burn on my leg. I screamed like a mad woman and began kicking like a mule. Then I pulled away and ran as fast as I could up the dirt path, all the way back to my truck. Halfway down the way, I heard a crow. I noticed my footsteps were the only ones I could listen to and hear again, and realized life had come back to the woods. My heart was somewhat relieved, although my legs were not slowing down. I scratched up my leg badly and I could feel it bleeding, but did not stop to check on it. Instead, I slammed into the side of the truck and got my keys from my hide box, jumped inside, and got the hell out of there, and I have not been back since. Now, whether something had my leg, I do not know, and I cannot say for sure. It could have been an old barbed wire fence or something that cut me on the way there because I was definitely not paying attention as much as I should have. I have heard the clicking before, but I always wrote it off like tree branches or something. One thing is for sure. Always pay attention when the woods go silent, and always bring something to protect yourself. Especially in these state parks. There seems to be something strange going on here. In the fall of 2016, a friend and I decided to go hiking in the late afternoon in a more densely wooded wilderness area in the mountains not far from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Now, these woods were in a state park. My friend Rick was close to 60 at the time and recovering from a triple bypass he had undergone about 16 months earlier. We had been hiking this and other trails for about a year following his operation to strengthen his cardiovascular health. That day, a weekday, I hiked with a bottle of water, my wallet, and my keys, but nothing else. Nothing to protect myself. The trail we picked is a popular weekend hiking spot that we had taken dozens of times before. We were both comfortable with the hike and had never had a problem on that path, or any other for that matter. While Rick is older and at the time a little more feebler after his health problems, I was in my mid-40s, well over 6 foot tall, and in pretty decent shape. So I wasn't worried. The trail we were on is in a state park adjacent to federal parkland. It's an outdoor enthusiast's dream. Most of our trek that day was completely uneventful. We just enjoyed the autumn leaves and chatted casually as the sun dropped lower in the evening sky. We had seen nobody else that day, which was probably to be expected given that we chose to hike late in the afternoon on a weekday. We'd completed about 4 miles of the 6-mile loop, and up to that point it was an uneventful trip. On our way back to the car, and about 2 miles from the parking area, we spotted someone. Through an opening in the trees, I saw a young woman, probably a college student, on the trail ahead of us and moving in our direction. At first glance, I paid her very little attention. As the distance between us disappeared, that changed. I did not know her, so it could have just been mistaken, but there was something about her posture and expression that seemed off to me. As she got closer, it struck me that she had a semi-panicked look on her face and was moving quite quickly. But she was in athletic gear, so maybe she was just booking it for some cardio. She occasionally turned her head and stared over her shoulder. I followed her eyes and eventually noted another woman about 50 yards behind her. This woman was also walking up the path through the trees. The second woman was not wearing hiking gear. In fact, her clothing struck me as totally inappropriate. It was a warm afternoon and we were well inside a wooded state park area miles away from any homes, but she was wearing semi-formal office casual attire and a light jacket. I thought the clothes must have been second-hand because they were tattered, ill-fitting, and didn't look washed. She was a fit, athletic-looking woman who couldn't have been more than 25 or 30 years of age. It was too bizarre. The clothes were wrong for the trail and they were wrong for someone her age. Everything was off about her. Her shoes struck me as being even more peculiar. When she got closer, I noticed she was wearing scuffed leather flats, casual shoes with no ankle support. I found it completely odd because you don't see people on this trail dressed as she was and you never see them wearing shoes like that. My hiking partner Rick hadn't appeared to notice anything odd as he was completely involved in the conversation and just kept talking. The second woman briefly glanced up and we made eye contact as she neared us. The alarm bells went off in my head. There was something in her eyes that made me feel uncomfortable down to my core. I don't know what she was thinking if I'm being honest, but I swear she had contempt on her face. Part of me wondered whether I'd offended her by staring, so I diverted my eyes and kept walking. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was homeless, was wearing the only thing she had, and I was just being rude. But the warning bells were still going off in my head. I'm not a paranoid person, really, so having my sixth sense going nuts left me unsettled. I have fantastic peripheral vision, so I turned my face toward Rick and acted like I was listening to him, but I was watching the creepy woman out of the corner of my eye. The moment we passed, she spun her head around to study us and she slowed her pace. My internal alarms grew louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come to a stop and drop her face toward the ground. Her body half turned on the trail. It was very odd behavior. Rick and I kept walking, and around 50 yards further we made it around a bend in the path and I looked back at the woman before the trees obscured her from view. She was still standing there, her face down, but she was staring a hole through us out of the corner of her eyes. That was the first time I realized that I couldn't see her hands. One was inside her jacket pocket, and the other was hidden from view on the other side of her body. It creeped me the hell out. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For a half mile, I didn't see her again and had begun to wonder whether it was the first woman, the co-ed, that felt the danger as well. Clearly, she had, I thought, and that's why I was practically running through the woods at dusk. It also struck me that the creepy woman had stopped and studied Rick and me like she was deciding whom to follow. We weren't moving as fast. We were walking as quickly as Rick could manage, and he was clearly feebler than the co-ed. Those thoughts amped up my senses and I still felt uneasy, so I periodically checked behind us. At certain points through the woods I could see more than 100 yards. Nothing. I began to worry about the co-ed. My hair stood up for a second time as I felt the strangest sensation of being watched. Again thinking I was paranoid and half mocking myself for being afraid of the creepy woman, I turned my head around to assure myself she was not back there. I was wrong. She was there, following with her head down and moving briskly about 100 yards behind us, but with her hands hidden. I turned my head back to the trail in front of us and we kept walking. Still trying to convince myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary happening and that I was just being rude because she was dressed like a homeless woman. About 200 yards further along the path, I turned my head back to Rick and my heart raced a bit. She's closed half the distance. Each time we would walk around a bend and the woods obscured her location, she would emerge much closer to us at the next opening. I told myself again I was just being paranoid. but nevertheless tried to get Rick to pick up the pace a bit. By this time, he was clearly aware that we were being followed, and he was uncomfortable as well. Although, to his credit, he did keep talking and act like nothing was happening. With a half-mile to go before we reached the parking area, I turned my head once again, and she was just 10 feet behind us. I had not seen or heard her get that close, and it freaked me out. I literally jumped. One of her hands was in her pockets, and the other was behind her back. I got the distinct feeling that she had some kind of weapon, and that she had no fear of me, though I was considerably taller, albeit several years older. There was no mistaking her demeanor. She meant to do us harm, or at the very least she intended to intimidate us. I weaved my car keys between my knuckles of my right hand, handed my water bottle to Rick, and made an obvious fist with my left hand. With a half-mile left in our hike, I thought to myself, if this is nothing, she'll pass us and move on, as clearly she's moving a lot faster than we were. I was accustomed to people overtaking us when I walked with Rick, but she didn't pass, and never acted like she knew we were there, which was the creepiest part. I kept my head turned toward her as I walked and tried to get her to make eye contact, but she didn't look me in the eyes at first. She kept acting like neither Rick or I were on the path just a few feet ahead of her, and she slowed to follow closely behind. I was completely unnerved, and that made me even more angry. I wanted her to see how pissed I was and to convey with a look that messing with me was a mistake. When she finally did make eye contact with me, I glared and clenched my fist. There was an instant when I couldn't read her expression. She was simply blank, but as she studied my face, she appeared very agitated and a little less confident in herself. I was conveying one thing in the look of my face: back off. And at this point, I didn't give a damn if I appeared rude. She apparently thought better of whatever she was doing and slowed her pace so the distance between us grew to about 20 feet. But she was tense and kept whatever was in her hand hidden behind her back. I never saw her hands, but I know she had a weapon of some kind, and I believe she meant to do us harm, but I also know she recognized that I was ready to fight. I was mentally preparing to charge her if I saw a gun or a knife, as I knew Rick couldn't outrun her. I thought to myself, I just must surprise her. I also realized that I needed to have her in front of us. A few feet further, a quarter-mile away from where our car was parked, she was still stalking us, and I had enough. I was in equal measures afraid and furious. I told Rick that we were going to stop and let her pass, loud enough for her to hear it. Just as I was getting ready to stop on the trail and make her walk in front of us, she veered into a small clearing, plowing through waist-high brush, crossed a ditch, and scurried through a line of trees to a road that ran through the woods between the main road and the parking area. I kept my eyes on her the entire time. She had a car. It was parked alongside the little service road, partially hidden by shrubs, not in the parking lot. The last time we made eye contact was just before she climbed in her car. It was clear from the expression on her face that she was very angry. I glared at her, expressing my own anger, but I kept walking. When her car started to drive away, Rick got quiet before asking me, what in the hell was she doing? Did she have a gun? I told him I didn't know. I never saw a weapon. We walked back to our car without saying another word. Once the engine was on and the doors were shut, we chatted a bit more about how it was pretty creepy. We did decide to report it to the authorities and to make sure to have them check on the poor co-ed. To this day, I have no idea what the creepy woman was planning to do. Rob us, harm us, scare us, I have no idea. I am just thankful she decided better on it. I have hiked that trail more than 50 times since then, but I've never seen her again.
It is rather funny that I just found out about your show, considering I'm a real-life swamp dweller myself. I live in a hamlet that's smaller than a village named Swamp, and an actual swamp. My house is on the far outskirts of it, all alone in the middle of the woods with a bubbling creek running around the house and 2 sloping hills on either side. I call myself the real-life Shrek, but on to the story. This happened at this house around 25 years ago, when I was around 10. Back then, the house was a holiday house, a refurnished watermill that had been in the family for over 200 years. The time the story takes place, or at least the first part of it anyway, was summertime, and during that childhood time off, it was, of course, summer break.
Even the parents took vacation days so we could all enjoy our time together. And it wasn't just us, but also a friend of mine at the time, and his mother was also there. We played, ran in the woods and the swamp together, explored, and so on. But the event in the story happened on the third day. It was right after lunchtime, or so I was surprised, when all of the adults started displaying extreme lethargy, and even I, rather sleepy and tired for some reason out of nowhere, which was never the case, said that we should all take an afternoon nap, and everybody else agreed. It was strange, since we all talked about how busy we wanted to stay that day, when I noticed that a friend of mine, who will stay unnamed, didn't look sleepy or lethargic at all. So I wanted to see what was going on with them. I honestly felt bad about leaving him awake alone, but my head hit the pillow pretty hard and I was about to fall asleep. But that's when I noticed something and I forced myself to stand up again and go down the stairs towards the exit. When I went to the outside, it seemed like it was too bright even for the middle of the day. I stepped on the veranda and saw my friend walking toward me annoyedly. I didn't know what was happening or why he looked annoyed, but something told me to look up. There was some voices in my head, so I did. I saw straight up high in the sky, too high it was beyond the clouds. Around these clouds was a cigar-shaped thing. I thought it was a UFO, and I was looking at it in broad daylight. I thought it could be a plane for just a moment, but it had no wings and was hovering completely still. In shock, I looked at my friend and yelled, "Look up! Do you see that?" He looked up, but his expression remained the same, and as we both looked, the craft started moving forward, slowly, at this, speeding up, faster and faster, until it zipped away so quickly I couldn't believe it, like one of those science fiction movies. I swiftly ran into the house and tried to wake up my mom and tell her what we saw. But, well, no one would believe two kids that they just saw a UFO, especially if one of them wasn't even trying to sound convincing. And that was it for a very, very long time. I tried explaining the story off as some weird hallucination, but after some time I gave up. Many years later, I stopped being with that friend and meeting with them, and I had a strange revelation. I suddenly remembered all the events all over again, but this time some very scary and questionable details emerged. First of all, the moment I looked through the exit, I saw the very bright light. I saw my friend at the end of the grass clearing by the creek. He seemed so distant, and by him standing was two weird figures. One was tall, about 6 feet tall, and the other was only about 3 feet tall. They were talking when the tall one noticed me staring at them, and then the two looked very upset at the friend when he turned towards me and started walking while the other two vanished in the yellow-whitish flash beaming skywards. And that's when my previous memory resumed, only knowing I had to look skyward to see the UFO flying off. After this revelation, a few more things started clicking in my mind, such as why the patch of ground where those two stood over had a discolored patch of grass for nearly 2 decades. Why that friend never again returned to the house. Why everyone was supposed to be passed out for whatever reason, for whatever they were doing, and how I somehow interrupted them. But why didn't they get in the house? Or why during the day? Why did they stay so far away from the house? Later I learned from my grandmother that the valley the house was built on used to be a refuge for people hiding from raids, and that there were plenty of shrines and the like around. Also, a self-proclaimed witch visited the place, calling it a ley-line nexus and a safe place from evil. But I'm not so sure how much you can believe in that stuff. It's definitely a strange and crazy memory that I'll forever remember. This story could have been more spooky, sensational, long, and interesting, but in my experience, it was something that changed my life forever. In May 2022, I worked at a gas station and truck stop in a small town outside of Houston in Dallas. For most of my time working there, I was a night shift employee from 3 to 11 p.m. To make this short, let me add a little background on the business and some minor details about the town I was in. The town is rather small and rural. The closest shopping center is quite a few hours away, and one of the only grocery stores in town is Dollar General. The store I worked at was right next to an interstate that went throughout Texas, so we got a lot of customers, especially on weekends. We typically saw a lot of truckers, churchgoers, and people traveling with their Little League teams. Now that the basics are covered, I can tell you about the events that took place that May. On May 12th, around 1:50 p.m., I got ready for work. It was a typical day, thus far until I got an emergency alert stating, "Escaped armed convict male." This was strange, considering the nearest prison to me was an all-female prison and was more than 45 minutes away. Despite the alert, everyone was still required to attend their shift. 3 o'clock rolls around and we're all standing around the break room waiting to clock in. I remember everyone being super on edge, people whispering about the Amber Alert, trying to get more details about what was happening. Nonetheless, we got to work. Typically, we get 2 breaks that were about 15 minutes each, equating to 30 minutes in total. This was awful, but we made do. This isn't really important, but it does add context. We were not allowed to go outside for our breaks due to the alert and for our safety. The night shift crew was hands down the best group of people to work with, but on the first night of the unpleasant week, it was not the A-team. Once we clocked in, it was like there was a floodgate that opened for all the police and TDCJ, Texas Department of Criminal Justice officers, to come in. We had hundreds and hundreds of people coming in for some barbecue sandwiches and simple pizzas. And one of my favorite co-workers was the front end of it all. She was helping people left and right while making sure she was doing her shift-leading duties. I ran back and forth from the jerky case to the deli case, trying to get as many people out as possible. It was a very crazy night. Everyone searching for this convict was passing through our store, just trying to get nourishment for the long night ahead. That night, my coworker and I only got a break each after helping what felt like 1,000 officers, but it was not in vain. We did end up getting some information from the people on the search. Things like what this man looked like and what he was going to prison for. There were possible ideas of where this guy was heading, and they thought it was towards San Antonio, about an hour away from where we were. Now, I need some more background on the town I was in. Like I said before, the town was very rural. There were farms and ranches everywhere and tons of wooded areas. Also, to mention again, we were right on an interstate, so there were plenty of places to hide and run. I will spare you all the boring details of my week and get into the horrifying part. The search for this waste of life lasted 3 whole weeks. On June 2nd, he broke into a ranch house only a few miles from town. While in there, he managed to find a razor, shave his head, and cleaned up his face. He ate the food that the family had left. It's unknown how long he was in the house or if he had been wandering around and just found this empty one. Well, that day, a family of 5 walked into the ranch and found this piece of scum in there. The convict murdered this family. A grandfather and his 4 grandsons were brutally murdered. He shot them and then robbed them of the grandfather's truck and some guns. A relative hadn't heard anything from the family in a couple of hours and knew of the situation that was going on in this town. They called the police, and when they found the bodies, there was a national alert that went off telling everyone to be on the lookout for a white truck. This was difficult for every officer because there were so many surrounding towns, and they couldn't even know what direction or how long ago this person had left. I don't know how they did it, or what efforts they exhausted, but they managed to find the truck and set out spike strips to pop the wheels. The convict got out of the vehicle and started shooting at the police, who returned shots. Eventually their shots landed, and the man was declared dead. 3 weeks of torment for everyone in my town was finally over. This guy managed to kill 5 innocent people, children. This man killed children. In Texas, we have the death penalty, and I genuinely believe he got what he deserved. My mom told me once that it was over. There was a photo of his body on the internet, and to this day it's still on Twitter. I look at that photo sometimes, and honestly, I feel like the trapped air in my lungs came out at the same time. This idiot was dead. This happened about a year ago and remained in the top 3 of the scariest moments of my life. I was living in a rural county town in the mountains. It was so rural that there was only one road to take you in and out of the city. About 50 miles of pitch-black cliffs, fields, and the occasional farm. At the beginning of this road, when you first leave the big city, a vast gas station is always packed. This will be important. My mom and I had seen the midnight showing of some movie, and were heading home. We often stopped at the gas station to get a drink and fill up on gas for the long ride home. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy green Jeep pull out behind us, but I put this out of my mind. People came and went from businesses all the time. The Jeep drove behind us for about 5-10 minutes, keeping a reasonable distance. Again, it's really not that weird, but suddenly the car comes flying past us and down the way. My mom, who is driving, just scoffs and rolls her eyes. We were driving a comfortable 50 miles per hour, but those who knew the roads well would often go over 100, even at night, and zoom past anyone going slower. Our annoyance at the unsafe driving quickly turns into anxiety. The Jeep is pulled over on the side of the road with its hazards on. The back half of this car is partially in the road, and there's some sort of man's arm sticking out the driver's side window, gesturing for us to pull over. My mom doesn't slow down and just goes around him. We are both on edge, but it only intensifies as he flies past us again, pulls over and gestures for us to pull over. He does this once more before things get genuinely terrifying. After we pass him the third time, he tailgates us at least 60 miles per hour. He's so close that his headlights aren't even visible in the rear-view mirror, only the vague shape of his silhouette behind the windshield. He blares on his horn every few seconds, sticking his arm out the window to wave at us. This carries on for a half an hour. My mom is starting to hyperventilate, constantly increasing in speed as she tries to escape. I'm sobbing and clutching a pocket knife to make myself feel somewhat better, more than anything. And even though I'm not proud of it, I'm screaming at her, "Don't you dare pull over!" If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that was all that was going through my mind. I could only picture us getting murdered or worse on the side of a dark, lonely road in the middle of nowhere. There's no service until you hit town, and that we couldn't call police or anyone for quite some time. But just as I'm about to throw up from the nerves, the man slams on his brakes, turns around, and returns the way he came. We went the rest of the way home in silence. My mom and I talked about it for quite a long time the next day, and we figured he had seen us, two lone women, driving down a dark road, and thought we would be easy pickings, and he would have been right. Some people I've told this story to suggest that we dropped cash or a receipt at the gas station and they were just trying to be a good Samaritan and return it to us. But let's be real, I highly doubt that. Nobody's trying to chase us down at 1 a.m. on a dark country road. Nobody who does that has good intentions. Nobody's going that hard to give you a receipt or some sort of cash you dropped. Here's the weird thing. A few weeks later, this same Jeep did the same thing to a group of men carpooling to work at 7 a.m. If he's going to do these strange activity with 4 men during the daybreak, it makes me wonder what his intentions are.
First off, I would like to start by saying that I am not a professional writer by any means, but have always been attracted by everything paranormal. I was not always the bravest person as a kid, but I liked it all even still. I have experienced many things throughout my life, some things that seem like they are from a movie or a book. This time I'll be telling you of a more mild and a little less strange thing that happened to me while walking home one night. Before I start, I will give you a little bit of background, so you better understand my story. I was born and raised in a small town in Mexico. Everyone knew everyone, and even though we had cars, we had all mostly walked everywhere. There was crime, but it was exceedingly rare, and nothing violent really ever happened. I am the youngest of 5, and my parents were rarely ever home. This meant I was able to stay up late and go pretty much anywhere I wanted. My hometown is in sort of a valley, with most of the town on one side of the tallest hills. My house was on a block right on the foothills of the steepest hill of my street, directly perpendicular to the 2 main streets leading up to it. One of these streets was essentially a main road, It was used to go up to a hill which was used for religious traditions. Anyway, this main road was mostly populated by family, with my grandmother on my mom's side of the family living near the middle of the hill. Her house itself was small, but the plot was big and had my aunt's houses scattered around it. This was still quite a long walk from my street, probably 5 minutes of walking. My family was a very typical Mexican family, and would gather at her house pretty much every single night. On one night, I ended up staying way past my usual time with a few cousins. By the time I started heading home, it was well past midnight. There were street lights, but they were very spaced out along the street, which was blocked off by a bunch of trees, making my area very dark. It was creepy, especially for a kid, but the moon was out and it helped ease my nerves just a bit. I began walking downhill toward my house. The entire time, I just kept feeling weird, like I was being followed. I did not necessarily feel like I was in danger, I guess, but I felt very uneasy. The entire walk, my heart felt like it was going to jump into my throat. I kept walking down the street, having to look back and around every so often. Eventually, I reached the corner, turned toward my house, and now I was on my street. There's been a house that has been abandoned for an exceptionally long time. It has always given me the creeps, and it was the third house from the corner. I was just about to walk by it. Every time I walked by, I would always walk on the opposite side of the street, which did not even have a sidewalk. I would have walked through that same path that night, but this time it was blocked off by these huge piles of sand and dirt, probably some kind of construction work nearby. That, combined with a huge delivery truck parked on the curb belonging to my neighbors, forced me to walk in the middle of the street. As I approached the house, I had to mentally prepare and give myself the courage to walk in front of it. My heart began racing. I was always scared of the house, but for some reason, that night just seemed so much worse somehow. I forced myself to keep walking, and as I did, I heard someone call me from the direction of the house. I froze, my heart in my mouth, and turned to look, but I did not see anyone or anything. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I began breathing again, and I had been apparently holding my breath. I was about to start walking again when I heard the voice again this time. I turned to look at a boy. He looked to be about my age at the time, maybe a little bit younger. It struck me as odd more than anything to see a kid my age standing right next to me. I did not even think twice about the fact that I could see him perfectly even though he was standing in the dark. No lights coming from an abandoned house, and even a tree blocking the moon and streetlight. He kept standing there unmoving for a few more moments, not saying a word, just kind of staring at me. The whole time I was trying to process what was going on. He spoke again, asking me to go with him, saying we would play together. I kept trying to speak, but could not seem to form words. It felt like hours went by. The whole time I was frozen in place, just staring at this kid, my racing mind, and now realized he seemed to be glowing. I began to tremble the entire time. I kept trying to move, to scream, but I just couldn't. I couldn't even move to run. I wanted to get away desperately. That kid stood there staring back at me, not moving, not blinking. He spoke one more time before walking a few steps closer to me. He seemed to pass like a shadow or something as he walked. His figure turned dark and then became bright again. As this happened, he called my name, my full name, and then I realized he looked like me somehow. This shook to my core. I jerked back at the sight of this. It was me, but the eyes were all wrong. They looked like they were full of hatred. I regained control of myself. I screamed no at whatever this thing was and ran faster than I ever have before in my entire life. I still have no idea what that thing was. It didn't seem to follow me, and I never saw it again after that. It still scares me to think back to that day. People ask all the time here to try to figure out what it is that they saw, but I honestly kind of don't want to know. Anyway, if you do decide to read this on your channel, thank you so much for your time. So I live in a small town inland of the coast of New South Wales. I say in a town, but the house is situated a few kilometers out of the town. It is the kind of area you can see your neighbors in the distance, but you would really have to be screaming bloody murder for anyone to really hear you. A few more kilometers up the road, and it turns to the solid bush and national park. It is an old dirt road with trees on either side. Quiet, apart from a few dirt bike riders who go there mostly on weekends, and the occasional lost car, full-wheel drive, or person collecting wood. So for me, it was the perfect place to walk my dogs. On the day in question, I was out with my two dogs, a Great Dane and a Husky, and my mom's dog, a Scotty Terrier. My Husky likes to misbehave, so to stop her from taking off into the bush at the smell of a kangaroo, she is on an extender leash. My Dane is loyal to the core, so he is off leash, and so is the Scotty. She can be a pain and run off, but usually comes back. So this bush road has what it is called fire roads. I believe they were put there as an escape route, just in case if people get stuck in bushfires, but I'm not entirely sure. These little beat-up paths are 20 times tougher than the already rough dirt road I walk along. I was heading back towards home at this stage when suddenly all the dogs freeze up. For a moment, I thought it must have been a kangaroo or a wallaby, and instinctively grabbed my Husky's leash tighter. She always pulled my arm off when she saw or smelt a kangaroo, but they all stood frozen. I could see the fur on my Dane's back standing on end as they stared ahead towards the fire trail that branched off. For a moment, I thought it must have been a person and they were on edge because they had not expected to see someone. But as I took the time to look at what the three of them were staring at, I finally saw it. A brown-colored shadow in the thinner area of trees before the dirt track about 15 meters away. Now I walk this road nearly daily, so I knew each damn log in this area, and it was not something I had seen before. This was confirmed when the thing suddenly shot off and moved. It was fast, like abnormally fast, the kind of speed you would expect for someone on a motorbike. But there was no motor. In fact, despite my straining ears, I could not hear a sound. No cracking of sticks, no rustling of branches. It just took off into the thicker trees after standing there and watching me for a good 10 seconds or so. I was sure I had to be going mad, but as I looked at the dogs, all their heads were turned, staring in the same direction this thing had vanished. It took me another 30 seconds, standing, listening, before I finally managed to move forward towards the spot this thing had been. I had to pass it to get home. As I walked past it, the dogs all acted very strange. My normally brave Husky would not go near the spot, kind of sniffing at it from a distance, then pulling ahead. The Dane did a full circle of the spot, going to the furthest point on the other side of the road to avoid it. His tail was tucked between his legs, and the Scotty followed him, cowering in his shadow. I had never seen them act like this before. Normally, if there was an animal or a scent, they would all barge each other to sniff it, but they wanted nothing to do with this spot. If it were a person, my Dane would normally go into defense mode and stand guard, so I do not think that is what this was. Walking in this area so often, I knew the sounds of kangaroos, wallabies, birds, snakes, even feral deer. But this thing? It moved like it did not touch the ground. Not a sound. Had the dogs not been there and reacted at the same time, I would have thought I was just imagining it or I was insane. But the silence of the bush after, it made me feel not so right. The whole way back I just felt like I was being watched. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but I kept seeing and hearing nothing. As I left the bushy area, I began to feel more at ease and the dogs began to relax. Honestly, I don't know what I saw that day. There isn't much on Australian paranormal stuff except for yowies and spirits. But this figure was too big for a person. It seemed wide and solid, more like that of a bear on its hind legs. It had a full build, and it seemed very tall. But clearly, there aren't any bears or any animals like that in Australia. So, what did I see? What did my dogs see? It must have really spooked them, because I have never seen them act that way, and they have never acted that way again. Then again, I have made sure I have walked with more people more often. While I felt uncomfortable and nervous, I do not know if I was in danger or whatever it was. I mean, it did not attack me, though I felt like it followed me for a while. Either way, I certainly will not ever be going there without my dogs. About 3 years ago, I lived in a small Indiana town. Even as a kid, I always wanted to live there. It is the perfect town. Not too big, but everything is within a few minutes' drive. Groceries, bowling, movies, and bars. The house I rented at the time was on a quiet street that sat at the very bottom of a valley. I never really knew anyone around me other than the neighbors that lived just north of me. After a couple of years of living there, I was sitting on my roof porch one evening when I see this girl that I've never seen before. I could tell that she clearly was not from around there. She was kind of a hippie-looking girl, and you really did not see that in a small town like this. She was walking down the sidewalk with her phone trying to get service. She turned and asked me if I knew of a good spot to get cell service. I told her it was hard because of the way the valley was, and the only way I normally got service was by Wi-Fi calling through my internet provider. She kept walking, and that was the last I had ever seen of her. A few minutes later, the neighbor that lived next door came over to me and asked if I knew who that girl was. I told her no, and what happened with the girl asking about the cell phone service. My neighbor then proceeded to tell me that that girl was actually some kind of paranormal investigator from Texas. She and a couple of her friends were paid to come to this town every year by some neighbors a little further up the street. My neighbor began to tell me all these weird stories that came out of the house, and that apparently there was proof of it all. Doors opening and closing on their own, digital clocks changing from numbers to words, and even some recordings of people talking to spirits or ghosts apparently. Of course, I took this all with a grain of salt. I am always down for a good ghost story, but I'll be honest, I've never really fully believed in them. As far as I knew, the investigators stayed for a few days before they took off back to Texas. I never heard of them finding or discovering anything really. A couple of weeks went by and I forgot all about this. I was working the night shift at the time at a state prison not far from Indianapolis. I would come home every day at about 7 a.m., take a shower, and go right to bed. Suddenly, I started having very vivid dreams, paranormal types of dreams. Usually something was chasing me or attacking me, but I could never quite see them. I would eventually scare myself awake, sit up in bed until I calmed down for a little bit, and then I would go back to sleep until it was time to get back up and ready for work. This happened for a few weeks and I did not think anything of it other than just having some nightmares. Then the sleep paralysis started. I always had my phone sitting up in a way that I could just roll over and be able to see the time on the always-on display. I would begin having these same nightmares again, where something would either be chasing me or attacking me or something of the like, but I could not see what it was or where they were coming from. Then I would try to wake up, and I would open my eyes just enough, and I was able to look at my phone, but other than that, I was unable to move. What really freaked me out, though, was that I could see something floating in the corner of my bedroom just above my phone. It did not have a face, but it would just sit there in the corner of the ceiling, looking down at me. I would eventually go back to sleep and wake up and get ready for work when my alarm went off. To be honest, I was kind of enjoying it in a weird way. I always described it to people as going through a haunted house. I am scared to death while it is happening, but after I wake up I just kind of laugh it off and thought, man, that was wild. This was happening on an almost daily basis. Every day would be the same thing around the same time, anywhere between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. In 2018, I started a new job at a university and moved closer to my job. I got a new 2-bedroom apartment, and I've lived there ever since. I have never had these dreams or sleep paralysis since. Could any of that been related to the neighbors that lived up the street from me? Anyone lived in a pretty how town? Up so floating, many bells down. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. He sang his, didn't he danced his did? Woman and men, both little and small, cared for anyone, not at all. They slowed there, isn't they reaped their same?
Sun, moon, stars, and rain.
My summer job is giving tours of the woods and trails just outside my hometown of Older Hills, New Jersey. So far, it has been a nice job to have right before starting college. The pay is good. Appreciative customers often give me tips which I am allowed to keep. And I love being outdoors. I'm a small, pretty girl, and often people express surprise that I'm willing to go out into the woods alone, even in broad daylight, with total strangers. Maybe it's just the carelessness of youth. My routine is simple. I stand in the main parking lot of the Older Hills Woods Reservation, wearing khakis, hiking boots, and a maroon Older Hills Parks Department polo shirt. I carry a clipboard, but the clipboard is really for show, since I keep all the forms, maps, and information I might need stored in my phone. My boss has me carry the clipboard because he says studies show that clipboards let people know you're somewhere in an official capacity. My boss is a smart cookie. Whenever I think of Older Hills, I think of that E. Cummings poem, Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town. Older Hills is a pretty how town, full of old money and old mansions with big emerald green lawns, and the woods outside town are full of history and romance and mystery. I love spending time in them and leading others through them. Last week, a group of 3 guys pulled up in a monstrously huge jet black F-250 truck with Texas plates that squealed to a stop, taking up 1.5 parking spaces. I started to go over there and yell at them to move it, but when they got out of the truck, I thought better of it. All 3 were big dudes, and they kinda just gave off a vibe. The 3 guys were all dressed in shorts and t-shirts. 2 of the 3 had Texas A&M shirts on, so I guess that's where they went to school. The 3rd guy had an eagle clutching an American flag in his talons on his shirt. All 3 had trucker hats. One of them belched. The other 2 followed suit. I glanced half a dozen crushed beer cans in the truck while the doors were open. Expensive truck, expensive college, trying too hard to look like good old boys. I could smell the Axe body spray 10 feet away. Frat boys, I thought. This will be good practice for going to frat parties, I told myself, trying to look on the bright side. To tell the truth though, I was starting to get the jitters. There was something off about these guys. The biggest guy in particular, who I could already tell was their ringleader, had eyes that seemed a little cruel and wild. "Sup, baby?" said the shortest and fattest of the 3, giving me a wink. A million memes danced in my mind. I stifled a smirk. "Hey there," I said to the tall guy and smiled, just to piss the short guy off. "Would you like a tour of the woods? It's only $10 and the woods are really gorgeous." The tall guy smirked. "So you're asking if we would be willing to pay $10 to go out in the woods with a pretty little lady? Well, shit, yeah we are." Then he laughed and winked. "I'm only joking with you. What I meant to say is we'd love a tour of these woods, and $10 is a bargain." The middle guy, the guy in the flag shirt, spit tobacco on the ground. super charming, he wiped his lips in the back of his hand. Shit, I can't even get a can of Skull in the fucking East Coast for $10. $10 for a little natural beauty, can't go wrong there. He said East Coast, like it made him want to throw up in his mouth. But I ignored that and said, okay, well, we can get started right away. My name is Cordy, by the way. The tall one did the talking for all three of them. I imagine he usually did. I'm Tex. This little blossom here. Talking, his name is Haas. That fat guy there is Jimbo. Tex, Haas, and Jimbo. Of course. Tex, Haas, and Jimbo strutted back to the truck and hauled out 3 backpacks. I was not at all surprised and noticed the truck had a Sigma Chi fraternity decal on it. I'd already heard plenty of stories from friends who had gone off to college. Do we pay you now or when we get back? Asked Tex, casually, pulling a wad of 20s and 50s from his pants. Hey now, Tex, don't flash a roll like that, someone might try to rob you, said Jimbo. Shit, said Tex, I give up this roll over their dead body. All 3 laughed. We can take care of all that when we get back, I said. If you're not satisfied, I don't like the charge. We're pretty friendly and unofficial here, and we aim to please. I'm sure we're gonna be satisfied, said Haas. I mean, you seem like you're real good people. I definitely had the jitters, and the heebie-jeebies, but I also felt like I had a job to do, and I had to prove that I was capable of doing it. I guess that's why I decided to press on ahead despite my trepidation. Well, I said, follow me. Hey, you guys are Sig Cheese? I hear you throw some kick-ass parties. Yeah, said Haas, walking behind me as we made our way into the woods. You haven't lived until you've lived through Derby Days weekend. Yup, Tex agreed. Cool. I start mass next semester and I'm pretty sure there's a chapter. Yeah, said Jimbo. Masshole's pretty hard, but for East Coast pussies. The 3 high-fived, about 500 steps in, and it already felt like the longest tour of the summer. I decided to take the 3 frat boys on a Storm King Hill, which is a challenging but absolutely gorgeous hike that takes hikers past and sometimes through absolutely gorgeous flora and also offers a fair chance of spotting a red fox or some deer. Bears are on occasionally risk in the woods, but I'd like the old jokes say, if worse comes to worse, I didn't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun the 3 Texans. Probably just Jimbo. A voice in my head then asked, what if you have to outrun 3 Texans? It was a warm, overcast day, threatening rain, and none of the trails were very busy. The Storm King Trail in particular, which is our most challenging, but almost most beautiful, hike was deserted, except for the Texans and me. Tex, Haas, and Jimbo begun to linger together, whispering back and forth, 15 or 20 feet behind me, and it was starting to make me a little uneasy. Hey guys, I said, would you please try to keep up? It would make me feel a little bit better if we all stayed together. They did scurry to catch up with me as we hiked the muddy trails and took in the sights, but Jimbo commented, I bet a pretty lady like you could get into all kinds of trouble up here in the great outdoors, huh? I tried not to show how this vaguely veiled threat made me feel, so I just smirked at him. I'll bet Texans can get in some pretty good trouble anywhere, huh, Jimbo? That made Haas and Tex hoot and holler, and Jimbo joined in. We were a few miles into the hike, and had been hiking steadily uphill for some time, when Jimbo stopped, took out his backpack, and opened it up. He withdrew 40-ounce bottles of Budweiser and started handing them out. You know, you guys really aren't supposed to be drinking out here, I protested meekly. And just what are you gonna do about it? Asked Jimbo, with an edge in his voice. I could feel the mood starting to pivot, almost imperceptibly, from "aw shucks, it's all good fun" to something a little more sinister. I decided I was in no position to push the issue right now, so I just shrugged and said, if anything too serious happened, I would just call park security. And are y'all gonna call security just because some good old boys wanna wet their whistles? Asked Tex. I laughed. Nah, I don't drink beer or I'd have one myself. You don't have any wine coolers in your bag, do you, Jimbo? He grinned a beefy, ruddy-faced grin. Sorry, fresh out. Oh well, I sighed. Think y'all can keep up while drinking your beer? Shit, said Haas. I was an all-state running back in high school and drunk every damn down. Only thing you were all-state in was pulling your pud, said Tex with a laugh. Haas looked downright huffy and muttered something under his breath. We had hiked another mile or so, and we were almost to the part of the woods that I wanted to show them. There's a beautiful clearing with an idyllic, bucolic little pond that usually full of frogs and turtles this time of year. It is hard to find. You have to do a little bushwhacking and also do a little bit of rock climbing. And as far as I know, I'm the only person who has ever found it. I know it probably sounds careless. I was just asking for trouble, leading 3 rowdy frat boys to a clearing deep in the woods. But I just felt like there was something so magical about the place that I'd be safe once they saw it. Still, I was a little jittery when I said, "You boys want to do a little bushwhacking now? See something really cool?" They hooted and hollered. "Sure thing, I'm always down for a little bushwhacking," said Jimbo, predictably enough. I sighed and picked up a big stick and started clearing heavy, droopy tree limbs out of the way. "Be careful," I added. "Some of these plants have thorns that hurt like hell." After beating our way through thick vegetation, we had to scamper up a small, craggy embankment. Host must have lost his grip at one point because I heard him yell, "Son of a bitch, I cut my fucking hand!" "Does it hurt?" laughed Jimbo. "Hurts like 8 bitches on a bitch boat, you fucking bitch." "Boys, watch your language," I giggled, "or I won't show you my favorite spot in the woods." I saw the 3 of them exchange sly, mean glances. I got a serious case of the jitters again. Suddenly, I saw Jimbo reach into his backpack and pull out a roll of duct tape. "What are you gonna do with that?" I yelled. Tex said, "Well, Cordy, we already wet our whistles, now we're gonna wet our fucking dicks. And out here is pretty far. I'm pretty sure nobody can hear you scream." "Leading us out here. Don't even try to tell us you didn't want this, bitch," added Jimbo thoughtfully. Haas wasn't saying anything, just staring at me like a wild predator, which I guess is exactly what he was. I took off running in the direction of the clearing. Tex laughed. "Oh, you'd better do it over there if it's your favorite spot. Well, I'm fine with that. Let's make this shit romantic, boys." And suddenly, the 3 of them were hot on my heels. I slipped in the mud, and Tex, surprisingly fast despite his girth, had his filthy little fingers on one of my belt loops, and he yanked hard, but I got away. I kept running as hard as I could toward the circle of the trees and surrounded the clearing. Someone else, Haas, I realized, was so close to me that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. Never mind the jitters. My whole adrenal system was tweaked, and I could taste the taste of battery acid and bile in my throat. I slipped free of another pair of hands, and this time I didn't bother looking back to see who they belonged to. I felt desperate, like a hunted animal, running so hard that I felt that my heartbeat was going through my chest. I ran into the clearing. I think Haas must have been the first one who noticed my boss. Haas's eyes got big, like when someone saw something scary in one of those old cartoons, and he tried to stop and run the other way, but the ground in the clearing was so slippery, he just fell on his ass. By then, Jimbo and Tex had also looked up and seen my boss and some of his assistants, but it was much too late by then. I do wonder what they thought when they saw a 7-foot-tall man-shaped thing with the head of a stag and the torso of a man and a big, muscular, sinewy goat legs. My boss has big brawny arms and always carries an axe, and he's very theatrical about his kills. His assistants, devotees really, who look just like him, only a little smaller and a little less majestic, they prefer to use daggers. In a matter of moments, the fight was over and the frat boys died screaming. The rest of the clearing was, as always, peaceful and placid. The very image of the prolepsarian bliss. A frog hopped into the pond and made a splash while one of the stag's headed goats, underlings, ripped off the hosse's right arm and began to munch on it serenely. My boss is a smart cookie. He knows nobody would question that a college girl standing around in a polo shirt and holding a clipboard must be an official of some kind. Never mind that Older Hills is such a rich place and too full of money to do anything so common as offer guides to the goddamn woods. The only things that Older Parks and Recs departments really cares about is annual cocktails galas in the park. No matter how many times I lead sacrificial victims to their doom in this enchanted and hallowed space, I always get so jittery. It is such a thrill to serve a powerful, virile, laughing god. The compensation is so amazing, but most of the thing I do is for the awe. My boss says that I'm the best guide he has ever had. Hell, not just my boss, my god. An hour later, it was all over but the feasting.
You served me well, as always.
My boss beamed at me while he munched languidly on Tex's brain. The clearing was strewn with body parts and blood and viscera. Someone's liver was strung up on a yew tree and some crows had already begun nibbling on it. A camo hat and a MAGA hat, smeared with blood and dotted with bits of scalp, were dangling from the limbs on trees down by the lake, and someone's hiking boot, with the foot still inside and oozing blood, had caught the attention of some more crows, who were pecking greedily. I saw one of them pull a big chunk of something out of the boot and then fly off and enjoy his prize. One of the stag-headed god's devotees had ripped the skin off Jimbo's face and eaten it like string cheese, and was now playing with his big fat skull, pretending to make it talk. "Well, howdy, little lady," he said in a perfect Texas drawl that made me giggle. I took Tex's roll of 20s and put it in my backpack. The tips are my favorite part of the job, I tell you what. Older Hills is such an opulent, pretty hell town. And yet, just a few miles outside town, deep in the forest, a ritual such savage and primal pandemonium is the law of the land. Sometimes I think about what a contradiction this is, but the thing is, I believe that many of the first families of Older Hills have a bone-deep understanding that there is something that lives out here in the woods, and that as long as he stays healthy and happy, the town also stays healthy and happy. The stag-headed god is so old and so strong, older than Older Hills, and I believe that is why no one ever questions why so many people go out into the woods with a high school girl pretending to be their guide and never, ever are heard from again. Pretty how towns know how to keep their secrets. I've been with the park rangers in Alaska for about 30 years. I'm getting ready to retire in a few months' time. Alaska is an amazingly beautiful state. In many ways, it is far different from the rest of the United States. There is a lot more wilderness and things that are still quite wild. Nature is much more prevalent and things are a lot more rural. If you've ever wanted to live in a place without a lot of neighbors, Alaska has plenty of places just for you. Anyway, my story starts in 1996. We got a call about a missing person. Now, we get the occasional missing person, and that's not unusual by any means, especially out in the wilds of Alaska. But this was a bit more pressing as the missing person wasn't an Alaskan resident. The person was a woman who was supposed to have come to visit some family. They were due out a week prior to return, but the family hadn't heard from her. I reassured the woman that there was a strong chance she was probably already back, but she hadn't checked in. Considering this was a younger woman, I thought maybe she was just enjoying her freedom, so to speak, as that wasn't very uncommon. Still, I told her we'd take things into consideration and we would look into things and let her know what we found. The first thing I did was head over and check in with the family this woman was supposed to be visiting. I was quite of the belief that the missing woman had already headed out of Alaska and gone back to New York where she lived, but I figured I should just check anyway, as if it were my kid, I want to know where their whereabouts were as well. It took some time to get where I was headed, as travel isn't always the most convenient out here in Alaska. Upon my arrival, I knocked on the door of this girl's aunt and explained the situation. I asked some simple questions, and it was then I grew a little bit more worried than I'd initially been. This girl's aunt was very welcoming and gracious, and while I was appreciative of this, she informed me quickly that she hadn't seen her niece since she left a week ago to go back home. I had a cup of coffee and thanked the woman before reassuring her I'd check in with the pilot who flew her out, and I'd get back to her. It wasn't long before I headed that way. While I was a bit more worried, I fully expected to hear from the pilot, and they'd flown her out to the nearest airport outside of Alaska. It was all okay. This theory was great and all except for one thing. Upon heading to where this pilot lived, I found something quite suspicious. A door covered in red. I'm not talking painted red. I'm talking a blood spray sort of red. I pounded on the door and announced myself several times, but I got no answer. I peeked around the residence and found what looked like to be more blood. I began following the trail, and there were points where I saw claw marks dug into the side of the cabin this pilot lived in. Eventually, I happened upon a broken window around the back. I took my flashlight and looked inside a bit and noticed there was blood absolutely everywhere. It was at this point I called the nearest authorities. I explained everything to them, and it was here the real investigation began. Inside the cabin was a horrid smell. The authorities had found bits and pieces of this pilot throughout the cabin. A head there, an arm here, blood and entrails just about everywhere. It was sickening, to say the least. It was possible the girl had been in the area, but it had been too long to know for sure. I decided to head back to the airstrip the pilot would have flown out from, and found almost nothing to authenticate what had happened, or if the girl had ever even been there. My initial thought was she had to have been there. Still, there wasn't much to go on, and the trail was fairly non-existent. Having nothing much to go on, I headed back to my own station and informed all the family members of the goings-ons. Mostly, we'd continue searching, and that it appeared that she was indeed missing. I obviously didn't let them know the details of the pilot or anything they didn't need to know. A day turned to a week, which was a month later, and we hadn't really found anything. There was nothing on what had happened to the girl or why the pilot had been mauled or by what. Most of the law enforcement seemed to assume it was a wild animal, but I didn't think as much. I'd never seen a wild animal force its way into someone's home and then just proceed to eviscerate them completely. Sure, sometimes you'll get a wild animal that gets a little too wild, but the level of which the person has been massacred didn't make much sense. Also, it didn't seem like whatever mauled the pilot ate anything. The person was in pieces, sure, but if it were an animal, you'd think it would have feasted on some of it, if not all of it. Also, the claw marks were deep, and none of them seemed to match any kind of animal we had here in Alaska. The eeriest part of all this was that whatever attacked the pilot seemed to have done so with intelligence and almost cold calculation. There are plenty of smart animals out there, but the pilot was able to get their gun off to fire several shots in the process somehow. Whatever attacked him had somehow avoided these things. You'd have to be pretty fast to do something like that. I don't know a human or an animal that could avoid being shot at that close of range and get close enough to rip someone to pieces while that person is firing a shotgun right in front of them. Not a single part of this sat well with me, but there wasn't much I was able to do because I had little to nothing to go on.
Looking back now, I wish this would have just been the end, honestly. I mean, no disrespect to the family or the girl or the pilot, but what happened next was more than I could have ever bargained for, if you catch my drift. I was home one night, about a couple of months after the investigation, when I heard a faint call for help. I was in my chair, fire going and doors locked. Because of the nature of the snow that was falling, I initially thought the wind was playing tricks on my mind, as it was storming pretty hard out there. This quickly changed upon the sound of a loud pounding on my door. I jumped, nearly spilling my hot cocoa all over myself, and I quickly shouted a few obscenities before grabbing my gun and asking who was there. I heard nothing in response, and I decided to check what could be out on the other side of that peephole. It was then I was shocked to see a blonde girl in her 20s covered in blood, crying outside my door. I quickly unlocked my door and swung it open, looking to help this girl, but upon opening the door, I saw no one. I was thrown off by this, especially when I shut the door, locked it again, took 2 steps before the pounding started again. I looked at the peephole again, but as I did, my power died for a moment. I felt shaky, and I couldn't see the best. I swore for a moment I heard the sound of faint sniffling and crying, but it was only for a second when the power came back on. This was normal, the blizzard being what it was. The thing that wasn't normal, however, was what happened next. I heard persistent knocking like something was blowing in the wind at my door. This was quite different from the pounding I had heard initially. Looking through the peephole, I saw a rope. Inside this rope was a bloody trash bag. I flipped out and called the police. The entire time I waited, I could hear the bag hitting the door. When law enforcement arrived, they found remains of a woman. It matched the idea of that missing woman that we were investigating. This poor girl had been torn to pieces. It looked like someone had ripped her spine out of her body and had a grand old time tearing the rest of her body piece by piece. This wasn't natural and it wasn't normal. I was shaken, to say the least. Something was out there and it left me this girl, which meant it knew where I lived and that I had looked into the disappearances. The next few nights I had were sleepless. Part of this was from the guilt of the way this girl was found, and part of this was from the horror of that same thing. What little sleep I did get came with nightmares and disturbing chantings inside my mind. I'd hear several minutes upon waking. In time, this slowly stopped. It was a year later before things got really strange again. I'd somewhat moved on from the previous year's events, as much as anyone could after something like that, when I got a call to the station. It was something crying and trying to speak, but it was breaking up quite a bit. After several attempts to calm this person down, the line died, abruptly. I decided to check around at the phone stations around the park and see if I could find anything. It was around the time I hit one of our most remote stations that I knew something was up. I found a blood-soaked handprint that seemed to streak. The phone line had been ripped out in the phone, and there was a trail of blood that led deeper into the woods. I called law enforcement and gave them my location before slowly making my way, gun in hand, down the blood-soaked snow trail. It wasn't long before I found myself face to face with a fresh body, or half of one, that is. A man was pinned to a tree by a branch that was driven through its mouth. His top half was there, but where his bottom half should have been, there was only blood and some of his insides, which were steaming in the snow. It was here I stopped and waited for the authorities to arrive. I wasn't even slightly comfortable at this point, and I quite honestly wanted nothing to do with the continuing of this investigation. I didn't exactly have a choice, however, as this happened at my park and I was beginning to think it was done intentionally. Afraid for my life, I didn't dare move an inch till the police arrived. I told them everything I had found and what little I knew, and they eventually found the rest of the man a mile away. I went home and tried to sleep, but I didn't get much at all. I called in and took some time off, which was easy to do since I was the lead at the station. During my time off, I'd get strange nightly phone calls. The first time, it was the voice of the man who'd called me right before his death. I still get chills thinking about how the voice sounded exactly like the man. I swore it was his dying moments replayed again. The thing is, though, an audio recording back then would have been obvious. This was no audio recording. It was either the dead man's ghost or something that mimicked his last moments perfectly. The second night I got a call, and it was just snickering on the other line. I threatened to call law enforcement and told whoever was on the other end of this line exactly what they could do to themselves if they catch my drift. Night 3 was several varying phone calls from 2 to 4 in the morning. They were all different and all on the hour. One was a woman crying. The 3 a.m. call was a child asking for his mother over and over again. And the final call of the night was a repeat of the man who'd been mauled at our park. I called the authorities, but they couldn't do much about it. The 4th night was an almost demonic or extremely warped voice. I couldn't understand it at all. And night 5 was someone whispering, "I see you," before hanging up. This call really unnerved me. The reason being was the strange wailing that came from outside my window after it happened. I peeked out the curtains and saw nothing, but I was uncomfortable the remainder of the night. I'd even taken to recording the calls so I could share them with law enforcement. Again, there was nothing they could really do about it. Night 6's call was an older woman begging for help and screaming at what sounded like her slowly being murdered, and night 7 was just heavy breathing. As tired as I was, I wanted to get back to somewhat of a normal routine after this, and went back to work the next morning. I was convinced at this point that something was stalking me. I thought it'd be the best to take advantage of this knowledge to set up traps of sorts, assuming I could catch whatever it was. I clocked out at the end of the workday and locked up. I then proceeded to wait at my station. I wasn't going to go home. I figured if something was stalking me, I'd meet it here, at my work. So, I loaded up my shotgun and my magnum and proceeded to wait. It was about 11ish when I heard a loud pounding at my station door. I asked who was there, and it was then I heard laughter from behind me. I looked and saw blood on the window. The shape looked like a 3-fingered hand. This was followed by a large thud on the roof above me. I cautiously sat down and waited. I wasn't looking to be baited out. I wouldn't need to be. However, as I heard a loud smack hit the station window, oh my god, it was a bloody trash bag that sat outside the window. This was followed by another which slammed the window again, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then, on the other side of the bloody handprint, I saw something that I'll never forget. Then, a final smack on the window. I saw a crack in the glass before hearing the loudest and most disturbing screaming I've ever heard in my life. I wish I had the words to describe it, but there is no way to describe what it was I heard. I tried my phone, keeping a close eye on the windows as I heard a slow scratching behind me on the outside of the station. Unfortunately for me, whatever was doing this killed the phone lines. The slow clawing made its way around the station and soon hit the window on the glass. I couldn't tell what it was in the darkness, but I could see the marks it was making in the glass. I raised my shotgun, and the moment I did it, it stopped. Everything fell silent except for the snow and the wind that blew it. I heard a crashing sound behind me and spun around, firing off shots, but finding nothing. It was as I was reloading that I heard the glass shatter behind me. Burst would be a better description, as it flew inwards as pieces of glass cut my skin. I fell to the ground and got up before firing a few more shots into the darkness. I heard nothing, and my adrenaline had me on edge as I was shaking. I wasn't shaking from the cold, I was shaking from pure fear. I heard a woman's laughter and then a man's crying. These sounds circled me and I kept an eye out. Whatever was there remained in the shadows. I was even more afraid now as I wasn't sure where this thing was. Were the voices, the crying, all of it real, or was it something inside my mind? I knew whatever it was, this thing was creating it. I heard that same inhuman scream behind me, at which point I spun around and fired off every round I had left in my shotgun before immediately pulling my magnum out. There was a burst of disturbingly terrifying laughter that followed all of this. I've never heard anything so horrific in my entire lifetime. Things fell silent before a loud scream rang out ahead of me. I fired off a few shots and ran out the destroyed window in the direction of the screams. I didn't care if I died at this point. I just wanted it all to be over. I was sick of the sleepless nights and this thing toying with me, and so I fired as I ran until I heard clicking. I then reloaded as fast as my fingers would let me and shakily spun around in the snow, positive I was going to die at any moment. It was there I stood, shaking and crying until the sun came up. One of my coworkers arrived early for their shift and stood in shock at what they saw. They came to me and consoled me before driving out and finding a working phone. We called the police and I remember being in shambles. My mind was broken and I was afraid for my life. The worst part of it all was I never saw this thing. I gave the authorities my information and immediately took what I had in savings and moved away. My coworkers were able to help me find a transfer, and I now reside in California, where I'm getting ready to retire completely. Never found out what was going on, or what that thing was, or anything else in relation to it. I left the second I was able to, and I haven't been bothered by the thing since. Or whatever it was. I imagine it is native to Alaska. I have no clue what this thing was or how anyone is supposed to kill it, but I'm positive it is still out there somewhere, killing.